I stood at gate B12 of the Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, watching the plane that held my future taxi away from the terminal without me. Two federal agents gripped my arms, their faces grim, and hands resting near their holsters. "You have to come with us, Mr. King. A threat has been reported against your name." I did not struggle. I did not yell. I just looked at the flight information screen and realized my own son had just called in a bomb threat on his 72-year-old father to steal $5 million. Before I tell you how I made him regret the day he was born, let me know in the comments if you have ever been betrayed by the one person you sacrificed everything for. Hit like and subscribe if you believe respect is earned, not inherited. My name is Augustus King, and for 30 years I walked these floors not as a passenger, but as the director of security. I wrote the protocols these agents were following. I trained the dogs that were currently sniffing my luggage. I knew every blind spot in the surveillance grid and every weakness in the perimeter. But today I was not the predator, I was the prey. My brother Otis had passed away 3 weeks ago. He was a good man, a smart man who had built a logistics empire from a single delivery truck. He left behind a $5 million trust fund, and he named me the executor. Not his reckless children, not my reckless son Damon. Me. Otis knew that vultures would circle the moment his heart stopped beating, and he trusted his big brother Gus to keep the family legacy safe. I had arrived at the airport 2 hours early. That is the habit of a military man, and a discipline I never lost. I was wearing my Sunday best, a navy blue suit that I had pressed myself the night before, and my shoes were shined to a mirror finish. I moved through the terminal with the steady gait of a man who knows exactly where he is going. My destination was Chicago. The probate court hearing was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. All I had to do was show up present the original copy of the will and sign the papers to formally take control of the estate. It should have been the easiest mission of my life. I approached the security checkpoint. The lines were long, winding snakes of tired travelers, but I had pre-check. I placed my leather briefcase on the conveyor belt. It was the same briefcase I had carried since 1998, worn at the handle but sturdy. Inside was everything I needed: my change of clothes, my blood pressure medication, and the sealed legal documents that proved I was the rightful administrator of the King family fortune. The young TSA agent, a kid who could not have been more than 25 with acne scars on his cheeks, stared at the monitor. I saw his eyes go wide. He stopped the belt. He did not look at me. He reached for his radio and his voice cracked. "Code red at checkpoint 4. Repeat. Code red." The air changed instantly. It is a feeling you only know if you have worked in law enforcement. The ambient noise of the terminal seemed to drop away, replaced by a sharp electric tension. Travelers behind me grumbled, checking their watches, unaware that the world was about to stop. "Sir, step away from the bag. Keep your hands where I can see them." The young agent's hand was shaking as he hovered over his weapon. I did not flinch. Panic is an admission of guilt. I raised my hands slowly, palms open, showing him I was not a threat. I saw the fear in the boy's eyes. I knew that look. He thought he was looking at a monster. 4 more agents swarmed the checkpoint. One of them, a supervisor with a thick neck and a thicker skull, stepped forward. "Mr. King, we received a credible tip regarding your luggage, possession of an improvised explosive device, and a secondary report regarding mental instability and violent dementia." Dementia. The word hung in the air like toxic smoke. That was the key. An explosive device would get me detained for a few hours. But a report of dementia combined with a bomb threat would get me institutionalized. It would invalidate my legal standing as an executor immediately. Who knew I was flying today? Only 2 people. My son Damon and his wife Tiffany. They marched me through the terminal like a common criminal. People filmed with their phones. I saw the whispers. There goes the crazy old man. There goes the terrorist. They did not see Augustus King, the man who had kept this airport safe for 3 decades. They saw a confused, aggressive threat. They took me to the holding room, a room I had designed. Concrete walls, no windows, a steel table bolted to the floor. The air conditioner hummed with a rattling sound I had been meaning to fix 5 years ago. Officer Miller, the supervisor, sat across from me. He pushed a paper toward me. "We need to discuss your medical history, Mr. King. Do you know what day it is? Do you know where you are?" I looked him dead in the eye. "I know exactly where I am, Miller. And I know that in about 10 minutes, your bomb squad is going to open that briefcase and find nothing but a change of clothes, a toothbrush, and the legal documents for the King Family Trust. And when they do, you are going to realize you have been played." Miller frowned. "Played? By who?" "The tip came from a concerned family member, Mr. King. They said you have been off your meds. They said you threatened to bring the plane down because voices told you to." I leaned back in the cold metal chair. I felt a fire burning in my chest, but I kept my voice like ice. "My son Damon is a gambler, Miller. He owes money to people who do not accept I owe us. If I miss my flight, I miss the court hearing. If I miss the hearing, the judge grants emergency conservatorship to the next of kin. That is Damon. He did not call you to save lives. He called you to delay me long enough to get his hands on $5 million. Miller looked at the paperwork, then back at me. He was starting to doubt. But protocol was protocol. Even if he believed me, he could not let me go until the bomb squad cleared the bag and a psychological evaluation was performed. I sat there in silence. I closed my eyes and pictured Damon. I pictured him sitting in my living room, probably drinking my expensive scotch, checking the time on his phone. He thought he was smart. He thought his old man was a relic, a senile obstacle to be removed. He forgot that I raised him. He forgot that everything he knew about lying he learned from watching criminals I put away. It took an hour for the dogs to sniff, an hour for the background check to clear, an hour for them to realize they had detained a decorated veteran and former director based on a burner phone tip. The door opened and Miller came back in. He looked sick. He looked like a man who realized he had just made a career-ending mistake. "Mr. King, it appears there was a mistake. A malicious call. The bag is clear. You are free to go." I stood up and smoothed the wrinkles in my suit jacket. I checked my watch. My flight to Chicago had departed 45 minutes ago. The next flight was in 3 hours. It was too late. The hearing started in Chicago at 2. Even if I chartered a private jet, I would not make it in time. Damon had won. He had successfully grounded me. I picked up my briefcase. It felt heavier than before, not because of the contents, but because of the weight of the betrayal inside it. Miller tried to apologize. "Mr. King, we can arrange a voucher for a future flight." "We can." I cut him off with a sharp wave of my hand. "Save your vouchers, Miller. Just give me the call log. I want the number that called in the tip." Miller hesitated. "That is confidential investigation material, sir." I walked up to him until I was inches from his face. "I am not asking as a passenger. I am asking as the man who hired you 20 years ago. Pull the log. Now." Miller swallowed hard. He went to the computer terminal in the corner. He typed for a moment, then turned the screen toward me. It was a burner number untraceable to a specific billing address. But the call origin pinged from a cell tower in North Atlanta, specifically the tower that serviced the gated community where my house was located. I walked out of the holding room and back into the busy terminal. The noise of the airport rushed back in, but I felt completely alone. I took my phone out of my pocket. 5 missed calls from Damon. 3 text messages. "Dad, are you okay? We heard there was an incident at the airport. Call us, please. We are worried." I stared at the screen. The audacity of it. The sheer cold-blooded calculation. He was playing the part of the concerned son, perfectly establishing a digital paper trail of worry just in case anyone asked. He wanted me to call him back in a panic. He wanted me to say I was confused and scared so he could record it and play it for the judge. "See, Your Honor. My father is not well." I did not call him back. I walked past the ticket counter. I walked past the rebooking agents. I walked straight to the exit doors. The automatic doors slid open, and the humid Georgia heat hit me in the face. I walked to the rental car center. My own car was parked in long-term parking, but I could not use it. Damon knew my license plate. He knew the GPS tracker ID. If I was going to fight this war, I needed to be a ghost. I approached the counter of a budget rental agency. The girl behind the counter popped gum loudly. "Help you. I need a car. Nothing fancy. Just something fast and reliable. And I need to pay cash." She looked at me suspiciously. "We require a credit card for the deposit, sir." I reached into the hidden compartment in the heel of my right shoe. It was an old trick from my days in Vietnam. I pulled out a folded stack of $100 bills. The girl's eyes widened. "I will put down 1,000 for the deposit, and I want the full insurance. No names on the paperwork if you can manage it." She hesitated, then shrugged and took the money. Money talks, even when the law is silent. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in the driver's seat of a gray sedan that smelled like stale cigarettes and pine air freshener. It was a piece of junk compared to my vintage Cadillac, but it had a full tank of gas and an engine that started on the first turn. I gripped the steering wheel. My knuckles were white. The flight to Chicago was 2 hours. The drive was 11 hours. If I drove straight through without stopping for food or sleep, I would arrive at 1 in the morning. The hearing was over. By the time I got there, the judge would have already ruled. But this was no longer just about the hearing. This was about the principle. This was about a son looking his father in the eye and spitting on his legacy. I put the car in gear. I did not turn toward my house. I turned toward the interstate. I was not going home to be managed. I was going to Chicago to remind the world that Augustus King was not dead yet. And as for Damon, he thought he had stranded me. He thought he had cut off my wings. He forgot that a man does not need wings to hunt. He just needs a target. And Damon had just painted a bullseye on his own back. The interrogation room was cold, exactly 68 degrees. I knew this because 30 years ago, I was the one who set the thermostat protocols for all detention areas at Hartsfield-Jackson. The logic was simple. Cold rooms keep suspects awake and uncomfortable. It makes them want to talk just to get out of the shivering. But I did not shiver. I sat with my back straight against the steel chair, my hands folded on the table, watching the two-way mirror. I knew who was behind it. I knew they were arguing about the fact that my background check had just come back with a security clearance higher than anyone currently in the building. The door buzzed and opened. It was not Officer Miller this time. It was a man I had not seen in 5 years, David Patterson. He was the chief of airport security now, but back in the day, he was just a skinny kid fresh out of the Marines who I had to teach how to spot a nervous tick from 50 yards away. He looked older now, heavier, and right now he looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. He didn't sit down. He just stood by the door holding a tablet, his eyes fixed on the scuff marks on the floor. "Hello, David," I said calmly. "Your tie is crooked, and your team missed a blind spot in Sector 4 on the intake cameras. If I really had a bomb, I would have bypassed this checkpoint entirely and gone through the employee service corridor near the food court." "You never fixed that lock, did you?" Patterson flinched. He walked over and placed the tablet on the table. "Mr. King." "Gus, I am so sorry. We followed protocol. The tip was specific. It mentioned your service number. It mentioned the medication you take for your blood pressure. It said you had been spiraling since your brother died." I looked at the tablet. "Play it," I said. Patterson hesitated. "Gus, you do not need to hear it. We know it is a false alarm now. The bag is clean. The dogs found nothing. You are free to go. Play it, David." My voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of 3 decades of command. Patterson tapped the screen. The audio was grainy, distorted by a cheap voice changer, but underneath the robotic modulation, there was a cadence I recognized instantly. The caller used a specific phrase. He said, "The subject is becoming erratic and non-compliant." Non-compliant. That was not how a civilian spoke. That was how a security brat spoke. That was how a boy raised by a director of security spoke. It was Damon, my son. He was trying to deepen his voice, trying to sound like a concerned bystander. But I heard the slight whistle on his S, sounds the same speech impediment he had as a child before we got him therapy. He was using the terminology I taught him at the dinner table to frame me. I felt a crack in my chest, not a heart attack, but something deeper. The realization that the boy I taught to ride a bike had grown up to be a man who would swat his own father for a bank transfer. I looked up at Patterson. "Who called this in?" "It was a burner phone," Patterson said softly. "Untraceable. But the ping came from the north suburbs, Roswell area, my neighborhood." I stood up. My knees popped, but I kept my face like stone. "What time is it, David?" 2:15, he said, checking his watch. "My flight left at 1:45. The hearing in Chicago started 15 minutes ago. I had missed it. The gavel had likely already banged down. Without me there to present the original will, the judge would have no choice but to appoint the next of kin as the temporary conservator. That was the law. And Damon knew the law because I was the one who paid for his 3 failed years of law school. I picked up my briefcase. "Do not apologize to me, David. Just do better. Fix the lock in Sector 4, and wipe this recording from the server. If anyone asks, this detention never happened. But Gus Patterson started. If this was a malicious call, we can investigate. We can trace the... Let it go, I said, cutting him off. This is a family matter now, and the King family handles its own discipline. I walked out of the secure area and back into the terminal. The noise of thousands of travelers washed over me, but I felt like I was moving in a vacuum. I checked my phone. 7 missed calls, all from Damon. He was thorough, I would give him that. He wanted a record of his concern. He wanted to be able to show the court that he tried to reach his poor, confused father. My phone buzzed again in my hand. It was him. I stared at the screen for a long moment. The picture ID was a photo of us fishing when he was 10 years old, holding up a bass and smiling. That boy was gone. I slid my thumb across the screen and answered, "Dad." Damon's voice was breathless, panicked. "Oh, thank God. I have been calling and calling. I saw on the news there was a security incident at the terminal. Are you okay? Did you get on the flight?" I stopped walking near the glass windows, looking out at the runway. I held the phone tight enough to crack the casing. "I missed the flight, Damon. Security held me up. A misunderstanding." There was a pause, a silence that lasted exactly 2 seconds too long. I could practically hear him smiling on the other end. "Oh no, that is terrible, Dad. I know how important Uncle Otis's hearing was to you, but look, maybe it is a sign. You have been under so much stress lately. You are 72, Dad. Maybe traveling alone is too much for you right now." I said nothing. I just breathed steadily, letting him dig his own grave. "Listen, Dad." Damon continued, his voice dripping with fake honey. "Why don't you just grab a cab and go home? Tiffany and I are here. We will cook you dinner. I already called the court clerk in Chicago. Since you missed the appearance, I told them I would step in as the emergency representative, just until you are feeling better. I will handle the trust fund. You just rest. Go home, Dad. Go home and sleep." He was treating me like an invalid. He was treating me like a dog that needed to be put in its crate. He thought the game was over. He thought he had checkmated me. "Okay, Damon," I said, keeping my voice flat. "You are right. I am tired. I think I will just go home and rest." I hung up. I pulled the SIM card out of my phone and snapped it in half, dropping the pieces into a trash can. I did not want him tracking me. I did not want him to see that I was not heading to the taxi stand. I walked past the exit signs and down the escalator to the rental car level. I avoided the major counters, the Hertz and the Avis, where they required too much ID, and scanned everything into a central database. I went to the back corner to a budget place called Rent-A-Wreck that rented older model cars for cash. The guy behind the counter had grease under his fingernails and didn't care who I was as long as the bills were crisp. "I need something that runs," I told him, pulling a roll of cash from my sock. "And I need it to not look like a rental." He gave me keys to a 2015 gray sedan with a dent in the rear bumper and a faded interior. Perfect. It was invisible. It was the kind of car nobody looked at twice. I threw my briefcase in the passenger seat and adjusted the mirrors. Damon thought I was coming home. He was probably popping a bottle of champagne right now, telling Tiffany how easy it was to outsmart the old man. He thought he had bought himself time. He thought he had control of the $5 million. I started the engine. The car rattled, but the idle was strong. Chicago was 700 miles away. 11 hours of driving if I didn't stop. I was tired. My back ached. My eyes were burning. But as I pulled out of the garage and hit the highway, I didn't turn south toward my house. I turned north toward the interstate. The hearing was over, yes. But the war had just begun. Damon had forgotten the most important lesson I ever taught him. You never celebrate a victory until your enemy is completely off the field. And I was not off the field. I was coming for him. And I was bringing a storm with me. Interstate 75 is a concrete river that cuts through the heart of Georgia, and tonight it felt like a tunnel with no end. The rain had started 20 miles outside of Atlanta, a heavy, relentless downpour that hammered against the roof of the gray rental sedan. My lower back was throbbing. It was a dull, familiar ache that lived in my spine, the legacy of a shrapnel wound from 1968 and 30 years of standing on concrete floors at the airport. I shifted in the seat, trying to find a comfortable angle, but comfort was a luxury I could not afford tonight. I checked the dashboard. The fuel light had been glowing a soft, angry orange for the last 10 miles. I needed gas. I needed coffee. And I needed to stop my hands from shaking. Not from fear, never from fear, but from the rage that was boiling in my gut like molten lead. I pulled off at the next exit, a desolate stretch of road illuminated by the flickering neon sign of a 24-hour gas station. It was one of those places that smelled of diesel and damp earth, where the moths danced around the overhead lights like ghosts. I pulled up to pump number 4 and turned off the engine. The silence that rushed into the car was deafening. I took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of stale cigarettes and cheap pine air freshener that permeated the rental car's upholstery. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my wallet. It was a simple black leather bifold cracked at the spine. Inside sat my Visa card, the Platinum card, the one with a $50,000 limit and a credit score of 820. I had never missed a payment in 40 years, not once. Financial discipline was just another form of security protocol. You secure the perimeter, you secure the assets. I stepped out into the humid night air. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. I slid the card into the reader. Please wait. I rubbed my eyes. I was 72 years old, standing in a puddle of gasoline and rainwater 700 miles from the courtroom where my family's legacy was being stolen. I just wanted to fill the tank and get back on the road. Transaction denied. Contact issuer. I stared at the small digital screen. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I pulled the card out and wiped the chip on my jacket, thinking it was just wet. I inserted it again. Transaction denied. Card retained. The machine did not just decline the card, it kept it. I heard the mechanical whir as the reader swallowed my plastic lifeline. I stood there for a moment stunned. Then I hit the cancel button. Nothing. I hit it again harder. The machine was dead. I looked up at the security camera mounted above the pump. The red light blinked at me, indifferent and cold. And then it hit me. The realization was not a lightning bolt. It was a slow creeping poison. Tiffany. My daughter-in-law worked for First National Bank. She was not a teller. She was a senior vice president in risk management. She knew the protocols better than anyone. When a police report is filed involving an elderly person with mental instability, specifically dementia or Alzheimer's, banks have a fiduciary duty to protect the client's assets. It is called the Senior Safe Act. It allows financial institutions to place a temporary hold on all accounts if they suspect the account holder is being exploited or is incapacitated. It was brilliant. It was evil, but it was brilliant. Damon had called in the fake bomb threat and the dementia report at the airport to create the police record. Tiffany had used that record to trigger the freeze at the bank. They had not just grounded me. They had cut off my supply lines. They wanted me stranded. They wanted me starving. They wanted me to be exactly what they told the police. I was a confused, helpless old man wandering the highway with no money and no way home. I walked into the convenience store. The bell above the door chimed a cheerful ding-dong that sounded mocking. The clerk was a kid with headphones around his neck reading a comic book. He didn't look up. "Excuse me," I said. My voice was rough. "Pump 4 took my card. I need to get it back." The kid shrugged without lifting his eyes. "Can't open the pumps, man. Manager has the key. He comes in at 6 a.m. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 10:30 at night. I did not have 8 hours. I did not have 8 minutes. "Listen, son," I said, leaning on the counter. "I need gas. I have a long drive." "Cash or credit?" inside, the kid mumbled, pointing to the card terminal on the counter. I pulled out my backup card, my debit card from a credit union I had used since the 80s. I swiped it. Declined. Account frozen. Please contact your branch. There it was, the confirmation. Tiffany had not just frozen the credit card. She had frozen everything. My checking, my savings, my emergency fund. She had initiated a blanket lockout. I was standing there in a cheap suit with a wallet full of useless plastic and a stomach that was starting to cramp from hunger. I looked at the rows of candy bars and bags of chips. I looked at the cooler full of water. I couldn't buy a bottle of water. I couldn't buy a gallon of gas. I felt the panic trying to rise up, trying to claw at my throat. This was how they broke you. They stripped away your agency. They made you dependent. If I called Damon now, he would answer on the first ring. He would sound so relieved. He would say, "Dad, stay there. I will send a car for you." And he would win. He would take me home, lock me in the guest room, and by tomorrow noon he would be the legal guardian of a man who couldn't even buy a tank of gas. I looked at the clerk. He was watching me now. I saw the look in his eyes. He saw an old black man in a wrinkled suit staring blankly at a card terminal. He probably thought I was homeless. He probably thought I was exactly what the report said. Senile. I turned around and walked back out to the car. The rain was picking up again. I sat in the driver's seat and closed the door, shutting out the noise of the highway. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I closed my eyes, and I saw Clara, my wife. I saw her sitting at the kitchen table counting coupons. I saw her putting $5 in an envelope marked "Rainy Day." "Augustus," she would say, "banks are fine, but paper is power. Never let a computer decide if you can eat." I looked down at my feet. I was wearing my dress shoes, black Oxfords. I had bought them 10 years ago. They were stiff, uncomfortable, and solid. I reached down and untied the left shoe. My fingers were stiff, but I worked the knot loose. I pulled the shoe off. I pulled out the insole. Underneath the foam cushion, wrapped in a piece of wax paper, was a single bill, a $100 bill. It was an old series from 1996. The face of Benjamin Franklin looked up at me, stern and serious. I had put that bill there 5 years ago on the day I retired. It was a habit I picked up from my father. He was a sharecropper in Alabama. He didn't trust banks because banks in Alabama didn't trust him. He always kept a bill in his boot. He called it his freedom paper. He said, as long as you have enough money to get to the next town, you are a free man. If you have zero, you are a slave. I held the bill in my hand. It was warm from my body heat. It smelled of leather and sweat. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Tiffany could freeze a server in New York. She could lock a vault in Atlanta, but she couldn't freeze the inside of my left shoe. I put the shoe back on. I tied the lace tight. I walked back into the store. The bell chimed again. The kid looked up annoyed. "I told you man card machine is..." I slapped the $100 bill on the counter. It made a crisp, heavy sound. "30 on pump 4, I said. My voice was not rough anymore. It was steel. "And give me 2 black coffees, a pack of beef jerky, and that prepaid phone behind the glass." The kid looked at the bill. He picked it up and held it to the light. He took a marker and swiped it to check if it was counterfeit. The ink stayed yellow, real. He looked at me with a new expression. Confusion, maybe. Or respect. He put the phone on the counter. It was a cheap flip phone, a burner, the kind drug dealers and ghosts use. "That is $92 total," the kid said. "Keep the change," I said. I took the coffee. It was scalding hot and bitter. I took a sip and felt the caffeine hit my bloodstream like a jump start. I walked out to the pump. I squeezed the handle and listened to the fuel rushing into the tank. It was the sound of life. It was the sound of momentum. I ripped open the package of the new phone. I put in the battery. It booted up with a cheap digital chime. I didn't save any numbers. I didn't need to. I knew the numbers I needed by heart. I filled the tank until it clicked. I got back in the car. I looked at the dashboard. The fuel gauge needle swung all the way to the right. Full. I had gas. I had a phone that couldn't be tracked. I had caffeine in my veins, and I had $8 of change in my pocket. I was broke by the bank's standards. But I was mobile. I pulled out onto the highway, merging back into the stream of red taillights. I was not Augustus King, the wealthy retired director, anymore. I was Gus, just Gus, the soldier who crawled through the mud in the Mekong Delta, the man who started with nothing. Tiffany and Damon had made a fatal calculation. They thought stripping me of my wealth would make me weak. They forgot that I built that wealth from scratch. They forgot that I knew how to survive in the dark. They had taken my armor, but they had left me my sword. I pushed the accelerator. The engine roared. Chicago was waiting, and so was the reckoning. I took another sip of bitter coffee, and for the first time in 12 hours I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf that just found the scent of blood. I dialed the number of my old friend at the FBI. It was time to call in a favor. It was time to go on the offensive. While I fought the hydroplaning tires of a rusted sedan on a dark interstate 700 miles away, the lights in my home in Atlanta were blazing. I did not need a video feed to see what was happening. I knew the layout of my own castle, and I knew the nature of the parasites inhabiting it, but I did have ears. Before I left the house 2 days ago, I had activated a passive audio monitor in the living room. It was old tech, a simple listening device disguised as a smoke detector that dialed a secure voicemail box whenever it detected voices above a certain decibel. It was a relic from the Cold War days, but unlike the modern Wi-Fi cameras Tiffany loved so much, this bug could not be hacked because it was not on the internet. I dialed the access number on my burner phone. The signal crackled, and then the audio feed kicked in. The sound was tinny, but clear enough. Pop, the distinctive sound of a cork leaving a bottle of champagne. My champagne. A vintage Dom Perignon 1998 that I had been saving for my granddaughter's college graduation. I heard the liquid fizzing into crystal flutes. My wife Clara's Waterford crystal, the glasses we only used for Christmas and anniversaries. To us, baby. That was Tiffany. Her voice was sharp and nasal, piercing through the static. To the new King dynasty, and to getting rid of the old guard. I gripped the steering wheel tight enough to feel the leather wrap twisting. They were toasting. They were celebrating my destruction before my body was even cold. I heard Damon mumble something. He sounded nervous. His voice was low or shaky. Tiff, are you sure about this? I mean, really sure. What if he calls someone? What if the airport police actually let him go? Dad is... You know how Dad is. He is intense. He knows people. Oh, stop it, Damon. Tiffany's laugh was like glass breaking. He is 72 years old. He is a confused old man who forgets where he put his reading glasses. By now, he is probably sitting in a holding cell crying for his mommy or wandering around the terminal talking to a wall. The police report is filed, baby. The bank freeze is active. He has no money. He has no credibility. He is done. I heard the clink of glasses. I stared at the rain-slicked road ahead. Confused. Old. Is that what they saw when they looked at me? They didn't see the man who kept a $40 million facility secure. They saw a piggy bank that was taking too long to break open. I heard footsteps on the hardwood floor. Click, clack, click, clack. Tiffany walking in her heels. She was moving toward the east wall, the media wall. God, I hate this room, she said. It smells like old people. It smells like dust and missed opportunities. First thing Monday, we are gutting this place. What about Dad's records, Damon asked. I held my breath. My collection. 500 vinyl albums, original pressings of Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Thelonious Monk. Some of those records were signed. They were not just music, they were history. They were the soundtrack of the civil rights movement, the rhythm of my life with Clara. We used to dance to those records in the kitchen when we had nothing but love in a 2-room apartment. Trash. Tiffany spat. Absolute garbage. Look at this, covers are torn, it smells like mildew. It is just clutter, Damon. We are going for a minimalist aesthetic. White marble, chrome, no clutter, no dusty old jazz records reminding everyone that we come from humble beginnings. She didn't say humble, she meant black. Tiffany was the kind of woman who wanted to erase every trace of where we came from. She wanted to live in a world that was colorless, sanitized, and expensive. She wanted to scrub the soul out of the house and replace it with beige furniture and fake art. I am calling the junk haulers tomorrow, she continued. They can take all this scrap to the dump. Or maybe we can sell it for a few bucks to some hipster thrift store. Whatever, just get it out of my sight. I want this room ready for the contractors. The home gym is going right here. I felt a vein throb in my temple. She was going to throw away Coltrane to make room for a Peloton bike she would never ride. But Dad loves those records, Damon said, weak. He was trying to find a backbone, but he couldn't quite locate it. Damon, look at me. Tiffany's voice dropped low, dangerous. Do you want to lose the house? Do you want the loan sharks to come back and break your other thumb? Because that is what happens if we don't get control of that trust fund by tomorrow. The car went silent for a second. The rain drummed on the roof. Loan sharks. The missing piece of the puzzle fell into place. I knew Damon had been dabbling in cryptocurrency. He called it investing. I called it gambling with electricity. He had been bragging about his digital wallet for months, telling me I was a dinosaur for keeping my money in bonds and real estate. How much, Damon? I whispered to the empty car. How much did you lose? As if answering me, Tiffany's voice came back through the phone. You owe the guys in Buckhead $200,000, Damon. $200,000. And that is just the principal. The interest is compounding every day. If your father makes it to that hearing and takes control of the $5 million, we get nothing. We lose the house, we lose the cars, and you probably lose your life. So stop whining about his stupid records and drink your champagne. I heard Damon exhale a long, shaky breath. You are right. I know. I feel bad. He is my dad. He was your dad, Tiffany corrected. Now he is a liability. A liability we just liquidated. Focus on the prize, baby. $5 million. That covers the debt. That covers my nose job. That gets us the condo in Buckhead so we don't have to live in this neighborhood anymore. I am so sick of waving to the neighbors here. They are so noisy. My neighborhood was a historic black community. Doctors, lawyers, teachers, good people, people who looked out for each other. But to Tiffany, we were just noise. We were just a backdrop she wanted to escape. I heard the sound of glass shattering. Oops. Tiffany giggled. I think I broke one. Oh well. It was an ugly glass anyway. We will buy new ones. Versace, gold-rimmed. I disconnected the call. I tossed the burner phone onto the passenger seat. My hands were steady now. The anger had crystallized into something colder, something harder. It wasn't just greed. It was survival. Damon had dug a hole so deep, he was willing to bury me in it just to create a bridge for himself. He had traded his father's life for a crypto bet gone wrong. And Tiffany. She was the architect. She was the one pulling the strings, playing on his fear, feeding his weakness. She wanted to erase my history. She wanted to turn my life's work into a pile of trash in a dumpster so she could buy a new nose and pretend she was royalty. I pressed my foot down on the gas pedal. The old sedan shuddered and surged forward. The speedometer climbed past 80. The rain could not stop me. The distance could not stop me. They were drinking my champagne. They were planning to burn my history. They thought I was a senile old man wandering in the dark. Enjoy the drink, Damon, I said to the windshield. Enjoy the taste of the high life. Because it is the last drop you will ever taste. You want a war, son. You want to play gangster with the loan sharks. You forgot that your father was hunting wolves in the jungle before you were even a thought in God's mind. I checked the GPS, 6 hours to Chicago. I would be tired, I would be hungry, but I would be there. And when I walked through those doors, I wouldn't be Augustus the Father. I would be Director King, and I was coming to revoke their security clearance permanently. The white lines on the asphalt were starting to unspool like loose thread from a cheap sweater. I had been driving for 5 hours straight. My eyes felt like they were filled with sand, and every time I blinked, the lids felt heavier, as if gravity was trying to pull me down into the dark. I was 72 years old. My lower back was screaming a dull, throbbing ache that radiated down to my hips, a reminder of the shrapnel I took in the Mekong Delta and the 40 years of standing on concrete floors that followed. I shifted my weight in the worn-out bucket seat of the rental sedan, but there was no comfort to be found. The car smelled of stale smoke and neglect, a fitting chariot for a man whose life was being dismantled mile by mile. I shook my head violently, trying to rattle the fatigue loose. I reached for the cup of coffee I had bought at the gas station, but it was empty, cold, and bitter at the bottom. I was crossing the border into Tennessee now. The rain had stopped, but the fog had rolled in thick and gray, clinging to the mountains like a shroud. I narrowed my eyes, trying to pierce the gloom. The speedometer read 80. I was making good time, but time was a predator tonight, chasing me down, eating up the minutes I needed to save my family's legacy. Suddenly, a blast of light blinded me. A horn bellowed a deep, terrifying roar that vibrated through my chest. I jerked the wheel to the right. The massive grille of a semi-truck filled my rearview mirror, missing my bumper by inches. The backdraft shook the little sedan violently, threatening to toss me into the ditch. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wrestled the car back into the lane, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I pulled over to the shoulder, my hands trembling on the wheel. I turned off the ignition and sat in the silence, listening to the blood rushing in my ears. I was an old man fooling himself. I was trying to drive like I was 25 again, like I was invincible. But I wasn't. I was tired. I was broken. And I was alone. I leaned my head back against the headrest and closed my eyes. And in the darkness of my mind, the memory came. It always came when I was weak. It was the ghost that haunted the corners of my life, the reason why there was a wall of ice between me and my son that no amount of therapy could melt. It was 3 years ago, a Tuesday evening. I had gone to the pharmacy to pick up my blood pressure medication. Clara, my wife, my soulmate, was home alone with Damon. He was 30 years old, living in our basement, supposedly looking for a job, but mostly looking for the next level in his video games. Clara had felt the pain in her left arm. She had felt the crushing weight on her chest. She had called out to him, "Damon, Damon, please, help me." I knew this because she told me later in the hospital before the coma took her. She told me she called him 3 times. She screamed his name. And what was Damon doing? He was wearing a $300 noise-canceling headset. He was leading a raid in some fantasy world while his mother was dying on the kitchen floor upstairs. He later told the doctors he didn't hear her. He said the game was too loud. But I saw the call log on her phone. She had tried to call his cell phone from the kitchen floor. He ignored it. He sent it to voicemail because he was in the middle of a match. 20 minutes. That was how long she lay there. 20 minutes of agony while her own son sat downstairs shouting commands at strangers on the internet. By the time I got home and found her, it was too late. The damage to her heart was irreversible. I opened my eyes and stared at the fog swirling outside the windshield. That was the moment my son died to me. We buried Clara, but I also buried the hope that Damon would ever be a man. I kept him in the house because Clara made me promise to look after him, but every time I looked at his face, I saw the headset. I saw the indifference. And now tonight he was doing it again. He was trading my life for his comfort. I gripped the steering wheel. I would not let him win. I would not let Clara's sacrifice be for nothing. I turned the key. The engine sputtered and came to life. I pulled back onto the highway. I drove with a cold, focused fury now. The fatigue was still there, but the rage was fueling me, burning hot and clean. 10 miles later, the darkness behind me exploded with red and blue lights. My stomach dropped. I checked my speed. I was doing the limit. I checked my lane. I was steady. I slowed down and pulled over to the breakdown lane, the gravel crunching under the tires. The police cruiser pulled in behind me, its spotlight blinding in my mirrors. I kept my hands on the wheel at 10 and 2. I lowered the window. The rain misted and chilling my face. A young officer approached, his hand resting on his holster. He shone his flashlight into the car, sweeping across the empty passenger seat, my briefcase, and finally resting on my face. "License and registration," he said. His voice was tight, suspicious. I moved slowly. "I am reaching for my wallet, officer. It is in my back pocket." I handed him the rental agreement and my driver's license. He looked at the paperwork, then back at me. "Mr. King, this is a rental." "Yes, sir. My flight was canceled. I am driving to Chicago for a court hearing." He shined the light in my eyes again. "Do you know your rear driver's side taillight is out? It is smashed. Completely gone." I froze. The rental agency had said the car was checked. But then I remembered the lot. It was dark. I had been in a hurry. And then a darker thought crept in. A thought that made my blood run cold. Tiffany. 2 days ago, before the airport fiasco, I had seen Tiffany near the garage. She said she was looking for a box of old clothes. But she had been holding a hammer. She said she was fixing a loose floorboard. But Tiffany never fixed anything in her life. She broke things. Had she sabotaged my own car, hoping I would drive it? And when I took the rental, was this just the universe laughing at me? Or was this car so old and beat up that the light had just fallen out? It didn't matter. The result was the same. I was stopped. "Step out of the car, Mr. King," the officer said. I opened the door and stepped out into the damp night. My legs were stiff. I stood tall, pulling my shoulders back. "Officer, I didn't know about the light. As I said, I am in a hurry to get to a federal court hearing." The officer wasn't listening. He was looking at the rental agreement. He was looking at the Rent a Wreck logo. He saw an old black man in a cheap car on a lonely highway at 2 in the morning. I knew the math he was doing in his head. "Sir, I am going to need to run a full check. We have had reports of drug trafficking on this corridor using rental vehicles just like this one." "Drug trafficking." I almost laughed. "Son," I said, keeping my voice level, "I am the retired director of security for Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. I have cleared more background checks than you have had hot meals." The officer stiffened. He didn't like my tone. "Stay by the vehicle," he ordered. He went back to his cruiser. I stood in the mist, shivering. I checked my watch. 2:30 a.m. Every minute I stood here was a minute Damon was getting closer to the money. The officer sat in his car for what felt like an eternity. I saw him talking on the radio. I saw him looking at his computer screen. Then I saw him pick up the radio again, looking confused. He came back 10 minutes later. His demeanor had changed. The aggression was gone, replaced by a wary curiosity. "Mr. King," he said, handing me back my license, "your record is clean. Cleaner than clean, actually. But there is a flag in the system from earlier today. An incident at the airport involving a threat." I looked him in the eye. "A false report, officer. Filed by the same people who are hoping I don't make it to Chicago." He looked at me for a long moment, studying my face. He saw the lines of age, but he also saw the discipline. He saw the eyes of a man who had served. He sighed. "Look, Mr. King, I can't let you drive with a busted taillight. It is a safety hazard. And technically, with that flag in the system, I should hold you until I get verification from Atlanta." I reached into my breast pocket. I pulled out my wallet and flipped it open to reveal my military ID. The silver edges caught the reflection of the flashing lights. Vietnam, 1st Cavalry, 1968. I didn't survive the jungle to be stopped by a light bulb sun. The officer looked at the card. He looked at the Purple Heart designation. He swallowed. He took a step back and the tension left his shoulders. "My grandfather served in the 1st Cavalry," he said quietly. He looked at the car, then back at the highway. "I can't let you drive like this. But there is a 24-hour truck stop about 5 miles up exit 42. They have a mechanic on duty. You go there. You get that light fixed. You don't get back on the highway until it is red. Do you understand?" I nodded. "I understand." He handed me a warning ticket. "Get it fixed. And Mr. King, drive safe." I got back in the car. My hands were shaking again, but this time from relief. I watched him pull away. I had survived the stop. But as I pulled back onto the road, I looked at the clock. 3 a.m. The stop and the upcoming repair would cost me 2 hours. 2 precious hours. I calculated the distance. If I drove fast, if I didn't stop again, I would arrive in Chicago at 8 a.m. The court opened at 9. It was going to be close. Too close. I pressed the gas pedal down. The image of Clara dying while Damon played his game burned in my mind. The image of Tiffany smashing things with a hammer burned in my mind. "I am coming," I whispered to the empty road. "I am coming, and hell is coming with me." While I was risking my life pushing a beat-up rental car past 90 miles an hour on the outskirts of Gary, Indiana, the gavel was already being raised in Chicago. The Cook County Probate Court is a place where legacies go to die. It is a room of mahogany and silence where the air smells of old paper and indifference. I know this because I read the court transcript later. I memorized every word, every pause, every lie. I played the audio recording until the tape hissed. I needed to know exactly how my son murdered me legally while I was still breathing. The clock on the wall of courtroom 4B read 2 o'clock sharp. The Honorable Judge Eleanor Vance was presiding. She was a stern woman known for her impatience with family drama, but she had a soft spot for tragic narratives, and Damon gave her a tragedy worthy of Shakespeare. He stood at the plaintiff's table alone. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that I had paid for 3 Christmases ago. He looked impeccable. He looked like the grieving, dutiful son carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He didn't have a lawyer with him. That was a calculated move. A lawyer makes it look like a business transaction. Standing alone makes it look like a personal plea for help. "Your Honor." Damon began, his voice trembling just enough to be convincing. "I take no pleasure in being here today. In fact, this is the hardest day of my life. My father, Augustus King, is my hero. He is the strongest man I know." He paused to wipe a non-existent tear from his eye. It was a performance. A masterclass in manipulation. If I had been there, I would have slow clapped. "But the man I knew is gone," Damon continued. "Since my mother passed, and now with the death of my uncle Otis, my father has unraveled. The paranoia, the aggression. He forgets who I am. He forgets where he lives. And today was the breaking point." Judge Vance looked over her spectacles. She held a piece of paper in her hand. It was the faxed report from the Atlanta Police Department and the TSA incident report, the report that Damon himself had engineered. "I have the report here, Mr. King," the judge said. "It says your father was detained at Hartsfield-Jackson for making threats against a commercial flight. It says he was disoriented and belligerent." Damon nodded, bowing his head in shame. "Yes, Your Honor. He thought he was back in Vietnam. He thought the TSA agents were Viet Cong. I tried to stop him. I tried to get him to come home. But he ran. He rented a car and vanished. I am terrified for his safety, Your Honor. And I am terrified that in his current state he will destroy the family trust that my uncle left behind to care for his grandchildren." The judge sighed. She looked at the empty defense table where I was supposed to be sitting. The chair was pushed in. The surface was bare. My absence was the loudest testimony in the room. In the eyes of the law, if you don't show up to defend yourself, you are admitting guilt. My empty chair was confirming every lie Damon was spilling. "Is there any representation for Augustus King?" the judge asked the clerk. "No, Your Honor," the clerk replied. "Mr. King was served notice but has failed to appear." Damon stepped forward, his hands clasped in prayer. "Please, Your Honor, I am not asking for the money for myself. I am asking for emergency conservatorship to freeze the assets, to stop him from emptying the accounts in a manic episode. I just want to protect my father from himself until we can get him the medical help he needs." It was the perfect line. Protect him from himself. It is the phrase wolves use when they are cornering a sheep. Judge Vance looked at the clock. It was 2:15. I was exactly 40 minutes away, stuck in construction traffic on the Dan Ryan Expressway, screaming at a windshield while my life was being dismantled. Based on the evidence presented, the judge said, her voice echoing in the transcript, and specifically the alarming report from federal authorities regarding Mr. King's mental state today, I am inclined to agree that immediate action is necessary. She picked up her pen. The sound of that pen scratching against the paper was louder than a gunshot. It was the sound of my autonomy being signed away. I am granting the emergency petition, the judge declared. Damon King is hereby appointed temporary conservator of the estate of Otis King and the personal assets of Augustus King. All financial authority is transferred effective immediately. She raised the gavel. I can imagine the sound it made, that sharp wooden crack. It is a sound that ends arguments. It is a sound that separates freedom from captivity. Bang! Court is adjourned. Damon looked up. He didn't smile. Not yet. He kept his head down. "Thank you, Your Honor. You have saved my family." He turned and walked out of the courtroom. His stride was slow and measured until he pushed through the double doors into the hallway. The moment the door swung shut behind him, the mask fell off. I know this because the courthouse hallway cameras captured it. I saw the footage later. The slump in his shoulders vanished. The grief on his face evaporated. He straightened his tie and pulled out his phone. His fingers flew across the screen. He wasn't calling a doctor for his poor sick father. He wasn't calling the police to help find me. He was texting Tiffany. I saw the text later too when the forensic accountants pulled the data. It was short. It was brutal. Done. The old man is out. We are rich. He leaned against the wall and let out a laugh. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was a laugh of pure relief and arrogance. He had done it. He had walked into a federal court, lied to a judge, used a fake police report as evidence, and walked out with the keys to the kingdom. He walked to the elevator whistling. He was probably thinking about the condo in Buckhead. He was thinking about the crypto debts he could wipe out with a single wire transfer. He was thinking that Augustus King was finished. He stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. He adjusted his cufflinks. He looked at his reflection in the polished brass doors and winked at himself. He didn't know that I was 5 miles away. He didn't know that this senile old man had just navigated 700 miles of rain and fog on a tank of adrenaline. He didn't know that the game wasn't over just because the referee blew the whistle. I pulled up to the courthouse 20 minutes later. I double-parked the beat-up rental car right in front of a fire hydrant. I didn't care. I stepped out into the Chicago wind. My suit was wrinkled. My eyes were bloodshot. I hadn't eaten in 18 hours. I looked like a wreck. I looked exactly like the crazy person Damon said I was. But as I walked up the marble steps, I wasn't feeling crazy. I was feeling clarity, absolute crystalline clarity. I pushed through the revolving doors. I walked to the security desk. "Where is courtroom 4B?" I asked the guard. "Hearing is over, sir," he said, not looking up. Judge Vance has left for the day. I stood there in the lobby. The echo of my own heartbeat filled my ears. I was too late. The gavel had fallen. Damon had won the battle. But war is not decided by a single battle. War is decided by who has the will to keep fighting when everyone else thinks they are dead. I pulled out my burner phone. I dialed the number for the clerk of the court. "This is Augustus King," I said. I missed my hearing. "I am sorry, Mr. King." The voice on the other end was dismissive. "The ruling has been made. You can file an appeal, but it will take weeks to process. Your son is the legal guardian now." I hung up. Weeks. I didn't have weeks. Damon would drain the accounts in hours. I walked back out to the street. I looked up at the gray Chicago sky. I could have crumpled. I could have sat on the curb and wept for the injustice of it all. That is what they expected me to do. That is what a victim does. But I am not a victim. I am a soldier. And when a soldier loses a position, he doesn't surrender. He flanks. I got back in the car. I looked at the phone. I had one card left to play. A card Damon didn't know about because he was too busy counting his chickens. The hearing was about the will. But the will had a fail-safe. A clause I had insisted Otis include 10 years ago when Damon first started showing signs of being a leech. It was a nuclear option. A dead man's switch. If Damon was the conservator, he had access to the accounts. But he didn't know the passwords. And he didn't know that the bank required a biometric confirmation for any transfer over $10,000. My voice. My fingerprint. He had the legal right, but he didn't have the keys. He would find this out soon. He would try to move the money and the system would lock him out. Then he would come looking for me. He would need me. He would need the crazy old man to press his thumb on the scanner. I smiled. It was a grim, humorless smile. Let him celebrate, I whispered. Let him buy the expensive dinner tonight. Let him toast his victory. Because tomorrow morning when he walks into that bank, he is going to find out that a piece of paper from a judge doesn't open a vault that Augustus King designed. I put the car in gear. I wasn't going to a hotel. I was going to the bank. I was going to be there when the doors opened. I was going to be the ghost haunting the lobby. The judge had given him the title, but I still held the power. And tomorrow I was going to teach my son the difference. The heavy oak doors of the Cook County Courthouse swung open with a groan that sounded like a tomb being unsealed. I stepped into the lobby, and the blast of air conditioning hit me like a physical blow. It instantly turned the layer of sweat on my back to ice. I was wearing the same navy blue suit I had put on 24 hours ago in Atlanta, but now it was wrinkled, stained with coffee, and smelling of gasoline and exhaustion. My eyes burned as if someone had rubbed salt into them. My legs felt like they were made of lead and sawdust. I had driven 700 miles. I had battled rain fog, reckless truck drivers, and my own aging body. I had pushed myself beyond the limits of a man half my age, and I was 10 minutes late. I stood there for a moment, breathing hard, my chest heaving against my ribcage. I looked up at the digital clock mounted above the security desk. 2:10 in the afternoon. The hearing was over. The gavel had fallen. The judgment had been rendered. I could feel the defeat settling in my stomach, a heavy, cold stone of nausea. I had failed. I had let Otis down. I had let Clara down. But then I heard it. Laughter. It was a sound that cut through the murmur of the courthouse lobby like a serrated knife. It was coming from the hallway to my left near the elevators. I knew that laugh. It was a laugh I had heard at birthday parties and graduation dinners. It was the laugh of my son Damon. I turned my head slowly. They were standing there near a marble pillar, Damon and Tiffany. They were hugging, not a hug of relief or comfort, but the triumphant embrace of two conspirators who had just pulled off the heist of the century. Damon was beaming, his face flushed with the adrenaline of victory. Tiffany was checking her reflection in the elevator doors, smoothing her hair, smiling a smile that looked like a razor blade. They thought I was hundreds of miles away. They thought I was trapped in a rental car hell or rotting in a holding cell. They thought I was a ghost. I gripped the handle of my briefcase. My knuckles turned white. I did not scream. I did not run toward them. I began to walk, one foot in front of the other, the steady rhythmic march of a soldier approaching the front line. The sound of my shoes on the polished marble floor was heavy and deliberate. Clack, clack, clack. Damon was the first to see me. He turned his head probably to check for the elevator, and his eyes locked onto mine. The smile froze on his face. It didn't fade slowly, it just snapped off like a light switch. His jaw went slack. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking gray and pasty. He looked like he was seeing a dead man walking. He tapped Tiffany on the shoulder. She turned annoyed at the interruption. When she saw me, her eyes went wide. She took a step back, her hand going to her throat in a theatrical gesture of shock. For a second, there was silence. A perfect, terrifying silence, where the only thing moving was me closing the distance between us. Then Damon's survival instinct kicked in. The mask slammed back into place. "Dad," he shouted. His voice was too loud, too performative, echoing off the high ceilings. "Dad, oh my God, you are here." He ran toward me. He opened his arms wide. He was playing to the audience. He was playing to the security guards, to the passing lawyers, to the cameras. He was the relieved son, welcoming his lost senile father. He crashed into me, wrapping his arms around my shoulders. He smelled of expensive cologne and fear. I did not hug him back. I stood there rigid as a statue, my arms at my sides. I felt his heart hammering against my chest. It was beating fast like a trapped rabbit. "Dad, we were so worried about you," he said loudly, his voice cracking with fake emotion. "We called the police. We called the hospitals. Where have you been? Look at you. You are a mess." He pulled back slightly, holding me by the shoulders, looking into my face with eyes that were pleading with me to play along. He needed me to be the confused old man. He needed me to be the victim. I looked at him. I looked deep into the eyes of the boy I had raised, the boy I had taught to fish, the boy I had bailed out of trouble more times than I could count. And I saw nothing. No love, no remorse, just a desperate, calculating greed. I leaned in close. I moved my face until my lips were inches from his ear. I ignored Tiffany, who was hovering behind him, watching us like a hawk. I spoke softly. My voice was a low rumble, a sound that was for him and him alone. "I know you called the airport Damon." I felt him stiffen. His entire body went rigid. "I know it was you," I whispered. "I heard the recording. I know about the burner phone. And I know you are the one who told the bank I had dementia." Damon tried to pull away, but I reached up and gripped his forearm. My hand was old and spotted with age, but my grip was steel. I held him there, trapped in my orbit. "You think you won today, son?" I continued, my voice devoid of any warmth. "You think a piece of paper makes you the king. But you forgot one thing. You forgot who trained you. You forgot who built this kingdom." "Dad, stop, you are hurting me," he hissed under his breath, his eyes darting around to see if anyone was watching. I let him go. I pushed him away gently as if he were something unclean. "I am not hurting you, Damon," I said loud enough for Tiffany to hear. "I am saving you. Because if I truly wanted to hurt you, I would have let the FBI pick you up at the airport yesterday." Tiffany stepped forward then. She recovered faster than him. She put a hand on Damon's arm and glared at me. "Dad, you are clearly exhausted," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You are talking nonsense. The judge already ruled. Damon is your conservator. You need to come home with us. We will get you a hot meal and your medication." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had smashed my taillight, who had thrown my wife's photos in the trash. "I am not going anywhere with you, Tiffany," I said calmly. "And I am not talking nonsense. I am talking to the clerk of the court." I turned my back on them. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Every instinct in my body wanted to smash them, wanted to scream the truth to the rafters. But discipline held me together. Discipline was the only thing keeping me from becoming the monster they claimed I was. I walked past them toward the clerk's office window. I could feel their eyes boring into my back. I could hear them whispering furiously to each other. "What is he doing?" Damon hissed. "Why is he here?" "Let him go," Tiffany whispered back. "He can't do anything. The ruling is signed. It is over. Let the old fool file a complaint. It will take months. We have the money now." I reached the glass window. The clerk was a middle-aged woman with glasses on a chain and a tired expression. She was packing up her desk. "Window is closed, sir," she said, not looking up. "Come back tomorrow at 9. I placed my briefcase on the counter. I opened it and pulled out a single crisp document. It was not an appeal. It was a form I had prepared days ago just in case, called a statement of presence and competency. "I am not here to file a motion," I said, my voice steady. "I am here to file a supplement to the record for case number 492 regarding the estate of Otis King." The clerk sighed and looked up. "Sir, the hearing is over. Judge Vance has already ruled." "I know," I said. "I am not contesting the ruling. Not today. I just want it entered into the official record that Augustus King appeared at the courthouse on this date at 2:15 p.m. I want my presence noted. And I want this affidavit filed stating that I am here, I am lucid, and I am objecting to the emergency order." The clerk looked at me. She saw the sweat on my forehead. She saw the exhaustion in my eyes. But she also saw the determination. She saw a man who had driven through hell just to sign his name. She hesitated, then reached out and took the paper. She picked up her stamp. Thump! The sound of the date stamp hitting the paper was loud and satisfying. It was the sound of a footprint being left in the sand. She handed me the carbon copy. "It is filed." "Mr. King," she said, softening slightly. "Is there anything else?" "No, ma'am," I said, putting the paper carefully into my pocket. "That is all." I turned around. Damon and Tiffany were still standing by the elevators watching me. They looked confused. They expected a fight. They expected me to yell at the judge to cause a scene that would prove I was crazy. But I had given them nothing. I had given them silence and paperwork. I walked toward the exit, not toward them. I didn't look at them as I passed. "Dad, where are you going?" Damon called out, his voice wavering. "You can't drive. You don't have any money." I stopped at the revolving door. I looked back one last time. "I have enough, Damon," I said. "I always have enough." I pushed through the door and stepped back out into the Chicago wind. The cold air felt good now. It felt like cleansing. I walked down the steps to my beat-up rental car. I sat in the driver's seat and locked the doors. I watched through the window as Damon and Tiffany came out of the courthouse. They were arguing now. I saw Tiffany gesturing wildly. I saw Damon rubbing his face. They were rattled. They had the court order in their hands, but they didn't have the victory. They could feel it. They could feel the ground shifting beneath their feet. I looked at the copy of the document I had just filed. It wasn't about changing the judge's mind. It was about creating a timestamp. It was about proving that at 2:15 p.m. Augustus King was in Chicago. Why did that matter? Because tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. when the banks opened, Damon was going to try to access the funds. He was going to use his shiny new court order. But he didn't know about the fail-safe. He didn't know that the trust had a specific clause that triggered a lockdown if the executor was changed under emergency circumstances. He didn't know that the biometric security system required a voice confirmation from the original executor to authorize the transfer of authority. He needed my voice, and he needed it inside the bank. By filing my appearance today, I had proven I was in the city. So when the bank asked him, "Where is Augustus?" he couldn't say I was in Atlanta. He couldn't say I was missing. The record showed I was here. He would have to come find me. He would have to drag me to that bank. And that was exactly where I wanted him. I started the car. I wasn't going far. I was going to park across the street from the main branch of the First National Bank. I was going to sleep in the car, and I was going to wait. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now all I had to do was wait for the wolf to walk into the cage. I closed my eyes for the first time in 20 hours and let myself rest. The hunt was entering its final phase. The drive from Chicago back to Atlanta is 700 miles of asphalt that feels like a scar running down the center of America. I drove it straight through. No sleep, no food, just black coffee and the kind of cold burning rage that keeps a man's heart beating when his body wants to shut down. I had filed my paperwork in Chicago. I had set the legal landmine. But I knew Damon and Tiffany. I knew that while the law moves at the speed of paper, greed moves at the speed of light. They would not wait for the ink to dry on the court order before they started carving up my life. I pulled into my driveway at 4 p.m. The sun was hanging low over the Georgia pines, casting long shadows that looked like bars across the lawn. The first thing I saw was the dumpster. It was a massive steel container sitting right in the middle of my manicured grass, the grass I had cut by hand every Saturday for 30 years. It was already half full. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment. My hands were vibrating against the steering wheel. This was the house I bought with the overtime pay from double shifts during the Olympics. This was the house where Clara planted her hydrangeas. This was the house where I thought I would close my eyes for the last time in peace. Now it looked like a crime scene. I stepped out of the car. My legs were stiff, my back was screaming, but I forced myself to walk tall. I walked up the driveway past the dumpster. I looked inside. I saw my books. First editions of Frederick Douglass and James Baldwin tossed in a heap with coffee grounds and broken drywall. I saw my fishing rod snapped in half. I saw the quilt Clara had sewn by hand for our 25th anniversary stained with mud. They were not just cleaning, they were erasing. I walked to the garage. The door was open. Inside, it looked like a war zone. My workbench, my tools, my neatly organized jars of screws and nails were gone, swept away. In their place were boxes, stacks and stacks of boxes marked with black marker. Donation, trash, sell. And there, in the center of the garage, stood Tiffany. She was wearing yoga pants and a designer tank top, holding a clipboard like she was the foreman of a demolition crew. She was pointing at my leather armchair, the one that sat in the master bedroom, the one Clara used to read in. "Put that on the curb," she said to Damon. "It smells like old smoke. We need that corner clear for the treadmill." Damon was struggling with the chair. He looked exhausted. He was sweating through his shirt, his face pale and clammy. He looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. He almost dropped the chair. "Dad," he stammered. Tiffany spun around. She didn't look scared. She looked annoyed. She looked like a landlord finding a tenant who was supposed to have vacated the premises. "You are back," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. "We didn't expect you until tomorrow. We thought you would stay in Chicago to process things." I walked into the garage. I didn't look at Damon. I looked straight at Tiffany. "Get away from my chair," I said. My voice was low, a rumble from the bottom of a well. Tiffany rolled her eyes. She tapped the pen against the clipboard. "Augustus, please. Don't make this difficult. We are just organizing. We are making space. Damon and I need to move into the master suite downstairs. The stairs are too much for my knees. And frankly, you don't need all this space. It is wasteful." She walked over to a box on the floor. It was a box of personal items from the bedroom nightstand. She reached in and pulled out a silver picture frame. I froze. It was the photo of Clara and me from our trip to Savannah. It was the last photo taken before she got sick. She was wearing her blue sundress, smiling that smile that could light up a blackout. It was the most precious object in the house. It was the first thing I looked at every morning and the last thing I kissed every night. Tiffany held it by the corner as if it were contaminated. "And this," she said, looking at the photo with a sneer. "This is just morbid. You can't turn the master bedroom into a shrine, Augustus. It is creepy. If we are going to turn that room into a home gym and wellness center, we need positive energy, not reminders of death." She turned to the trash can beside her, a plastic bin filled with garbage. She dropped the frame. Time seemed to slow down. I watched the silver frame tumble through the air. I watched Clara's smile rotate as it fell. I heard the thud as it hit the bottom of the bin, landing on top of a greasy pizza box. Something inside me snapped. Not a loud snap, but the quiet, terrifying snap of a cable holding back a suspension bridge. I moved. I covered the 10 feet between us in 2 strides. I didn't run. I didn't lung. I just arrived. I reached into the trash can and pulled the frame out. I took out my handkerchief from my pocket. I wiped the grease off the glass. I wiped the dust from the silver. I did it slowly, methodically. I checked the glass for cracks. It was whole. Clara was still smiling. I placed the photo gently on the workbench. Then I turned to Tiffany. For the first time, she took a step back. She saw something in my eyes that she hadn't seen before. She didn't see the father-in-law. She saw the man who had stared down hijackers and drug runners. She saw the violence that I kept chained up in the basement of my soul. "Get out," I said. Tiffany blinked. "Excuse me, you heard me. Get out of my house. Both of you. You have 24 hours to pack your bags and leave. If you are not gone by sunset tomorrow, I will physically remove you." Damon stepped forward, his hands raised. "Dad, come on. Calm down." Tiffany didn't mean it. "We are just stressed. We are trying to help you." "Help me," I repeated. My voice rose slightly, cutting through the humid air of the garage. "You call this help? You throw my life into a dumpster. You throw your mother into the garbage. You call that help?" I stepped toward Damon. He flinched. "I built this house with sweat and blood, Damon. I paid for every brick. I paid for the clothes on your back and the food in your stomach. And this is how you repay me. By letting this woman desecrate the memory of the mother who gave you life." Tiffany laughed. It was a sharp, harsh sound like a crow cawing. She stepped between me and Damon. She crossed her arms over her chest and tilted her head. The fear was gone, replaced by the arrogance of someone who thinks they hold the winning lottery ticket. "Oh, Augustus," she said, shaking her head. "You really don't get it, do you? You still think you are the boss. You still think you are the director giving orders to your little security guards." She reached into her purse, which was sitting on a box. She pulled out a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it and held it up. It was the court order from Chicago, the emergency conservatorship. "Read it, Augustus. Or do you need me to get your reading glasses from the trash?" She waved the paper in my face. "This says Damon is in charge. This says Damon owns the decisions. Damon owns the assets, and Damon owns the house. You don't have the authority to evict a fly from this property, let alone us." She stepped closer, invading my personal space, smelling of expensive perfume and malice. In fact, she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "We have already made arrangements. Since you are so volatile, and since you clearly can't handle the stress of living alone, we found a place that is perfect for you." She smiled, a cruel, predatory smile. "It is called Happy Sunset. It is a lovely facility in Stone Mountain. Secure unit. They specialize in difficult dementia cases. We signed the papers this morning. The van comes to pick you up tomorrow at 10. I stood there stone still. Happy sunset. I knew the place. It was a warehouse for the forgotten, a state-funded nightmare where they sedated the old folks to keep them quiet and let them rot in soiled sheets. It was where people went to die when nobody loved them. So you see, Augustus Tiffany said, tucking the paper back into her purse, "You are not evicting us. We are evicting you. You have one night left in this house. I suggest you spend it packing a small bag. No heavy items, and definitely no dusty old pictures." She turned to Damon. "Come on, honey. Let's go order dinner. I am starving. All this moving is hard work." She grabbed Damon's arm and pulled him toward the door leading into the kitchen. Damon looked at me one last time. He looked at the photo of his mother on the workbench. For a second I saw a flicker of shame. I saw the boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee. But then he looked at Tiffany. He looked at the power she offered him, and the shame vanished. He turned his back on me and followed her inside. The door slammed shut. I heard the lock turn. I was left alone in the garage. The sun had set. The shadows had swallowed the driveway. I stood there in the semi-darkness surrounded by the debris of my life. I picked up the photo of Clara. I held it to my chest. They thought it was over. They thought the piece of paper was a shield. They thought the threat of the nursing home would break me. They didn't know that a cornered animal is the most dangerous thing on earth. They didn't know that by threatening to take my freedom, they had just removed the last restraint I had. I looked at the door they had locked. I didn't need a key. I knew a dozen ways to get into my own house. But I wouldn't break in. Not yet. I had 12 hours until the bank opened. I had 12 hours until the trap I set in Chicago would spring shut. But now the mission had changed. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't just about the trust fund. It was about survival. I walked over to the corner of the garage where my old tool chest used to be. They had moved it, but they hadn't checked the loose brick in the wall behind it. I crouched down. I pried the brick loose with my fingernails. Behind it was a small metal box. I pulled it out. It was heavy, cold. I opened it. Inside sat my service revolver, a standard-issue Colt, clean, oiled, loaded, and beside it a stack of cash wrapped in rubber bands. The rainy day fund Clara had made me promise to keep. I wasn't going to shoot them. I wasn't a murderer. But I needed them to know that the war had escalated. I put the cash in my pocket. I locked the gun back in the box and put the brick back. I didn't need the weapon. I had something better. I had the truth. And I had the timing. Happy sunset, I whispered to the empty garage, over my dead body. I picked up the photo of Clara. I walked out of the garage and sat in my car. I wasn't going to sleep in the house tonight. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me pace the floor. I reclined the seat. I watched the lights of my house go on one by one. I saw them moving in the master bedroom. I saw their shadows on the curtains. "Enjoy the gym, Tiffany," I said softly. "Enjoy the view. Because tomorrow, when the sun comes up, you are going to find out that you didn't just evict a father. You declared war on a general." I closed my eyes. I didn't sleep. I visualized the plan. Step 1, the bank. Step 2, the FBI. Step 3, the eviction. The van might be coming tomorrow at 10, but I would be the one driving it. And I knew exactly where it was going to drop them off. The lock turned with a sharp metallic click that echoed through the silence of the hallway. I sat on the edge of the guest room bed and listened to the sound of my own imprisonment. They had moved me. They had taken me out of the master suite, the room where I had slept for 40 years, the room where I had held Clara's hand as she took her last breath, and shoved me into the small guest room at the back of the house. It was a room we used to store winter coats and holiday decorations. Now it was my cell. I did not bang on the door. I did not scream for them to let me out. Screaming is what a victim does. Screaming is what a confused dementia patient does. And right now, I needed them to believe I was exactly that. I needed them to believe that the fight had left me, that the threat of the nursing home had broken my spirit. I sat very still. My breathing was slow and rhythmic. In the jungle, when you are outnumbered and outgunned, you do not fire blindly into the trees. You dig a foxhole. You cover yourself with mud. You become part of the terrain, and you wait for the enemy to walk right over you so you can strike from below. Steps approached the door. I slumped my shoulders. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I unfocused my eyes. The door opened. It was Tiffany. She was holding a tray with a glass of water and a small plastic cup. She was wearing a silk robe, my silk robe, the one Clara had bought me for my 60th birthday. Seeing it on her made my stomach turn, but I didn't flinch. I just stared at the floor. "Time for your medicine, Augustus," she said, her voice dripping with a fake sweetness that was more insulting than her shouting. She walked over to the bed. She didn't sit down. She stood over me, towering in her heels, looking down like I was a stray dog she had decided to pity for one more night. "Damon and I talked," she said, swirling the water in the glass. "We are willing to forgive your little outburst in the garage. We know it is not really you talking. It is the disease. The doctor said aggression is a common symptom in the late stages." I looked up at her, slowly blinking as if it took me a moment to recognize her. "Tiffany," I mumbled. My voice was shaky. I am tired, Tiffany. I know," she said. "That is why I brought you this. It will help you sleep. It will calm those nerves so you don't do anything silly tomorrow when the van comes." She held out the little plastic cup. Inside were 2 blue pills. I knew what they were. Sedatives. Strong ones. She wanted me comatose. She wanted to be able to drag a drooling, sleeping body into that van tomorrow without a struggle. I reached out with a trembling hand. I let my fingers shake just enough to spill a little water as I took the glass. "I don't want to go," I whispered. "Please, this is my house." "Drink the pills, Augustus," she ordered, her voice hardening instantly. "Don't make me call Damon to hold you down. We are doing this the easy way or the hard way." I looked at the pills. I looked at her. "Okay," I said softly. "Okay." I put the pills in my mouth. I lifted the glass. I took a large gulp of water. I swallowed audibly. My throat convulsed. Tiffany watched me like a hawk. She waited until she saw the swallow, until she saw the empty cup. "Good boy," she said. She actually patted my head, a light, condescending pat as if I were a toddler. "See, that wasn't so hard, was it? The drugs will kick in about 20 minutes. Just lie down. Go to sleep. And when you wake up, you will be in your new home." She turned and walked out. She took the water, but she left the empty cup, the trophy of her victory. The door closed. The lock clicked again. I counted to 10. 1, 2, 3. I leaned over the side of the bed and spat the pills into my hand. I had learned the trick in 1968 from a sergeant who taught us how to avoid swallowing tainted water. You tuck the object under your tongue right against the root. You swallow the liquid over it. It takes practice. It takes control. But I had plenty of both. I looked at the blue pills in my palm. They were dissolving slightly, leaving a bitter chemical taste in my mouth. I walked to the window. I opened it just a crack and flicked the pills out into the darkness of the garden. "I am not sleeping tonight, Tiffany," I whispered. I went back to the bed and sat down. Now the real work began. I waited an hour. I waited until the house went silent. I heard Damon and Tiffany moving around downstairs for a while, arguing about furniture, moving things around. Then finally the heavy thud of the master bedroom door closing. I reached into my sock and pulled out the burner phone. It was cheap plastic, warm against my skin. The battery was at 70%. More than enough. I dialed the first number. It was a number I hadn't called in years, but I knew it by heart. David Patterson, the chief of airport security. He answered on the second ring. His voice was thick with sleep. "Hello, David, it is Gus." There was a pause. I could hear him shuffling, sitting up in bed. "Gus, I told you I can't—" "Listen to me, David," I cut him off. My voice was not the shaky whisper I had used with Tiffany. It was the voice of the director. "I am not asking for a favor. I am giving you a chance to save your career." "What are you talking about?" he asked. "You have the recording, David. The call that came in yesterday. The bomb threat." "Yes, but we already cleared you. I don't need you to clear me. I need you to indict the caller." I heard him breathe. "Gus, you know I can't release evidence without a warrant. I am not asking you to release it to the public. I am asking you to run a voice comparison. You have my son's voice on file, David. From 2 years ago when he applied for a vendor permit at the airport. Remember, I rejected his application because of his credit check, but you still have his interview tape in the archives." David was silent. He remembered. Damon had tried to open a kiosk selling overpriced headphones. I had blocked it because I knew he would use it to launder gambling money. "Run the comparison, David," I said. Compare the voice on the bomb threat to Damon King's interview tape. I want a spectral analysis, and I want it emailed to me in the next hour. Gus, if I do that, if it matches, that is a federal crime. That is false reporting of an act of terrorism. That is 5 years minimum. It is your son. I closed my eyes. I saw Clara's picture in the trash can. I saw the pills Tiffany tried to force feed me. I have no son, I said coldly. I have a domestic terrorist who used federal resources to incapacitate a witness. Do it, David, or tomorrow morning I will call the FBI myself and tell them you suppressed evidence to protect a friend. I hung up. I didn't need to wait for his answer. David was a good man, but he was a bureaucrat. He would protect his pension. He would run the test. I dialed the second number, Nathaniel Cross. Nate was not a bureaucrat. Nate was a shark. We had served together in the JAG Corps 40 years ago. Now he was a private federal prosecutor holding a retainer for the airport authority. He was expensive, aggressive, and he hated bullies. He answered immediately. He never slept. Augustus, he said. I heard you had a hell of a day at the airport. I was wondering when you would call. You heard I asked. I hear everything, Gus. I heard someone swatted you. I heard you missed your hearing in Chicago. And I heard your boy Damon is popping champagne. He is not popping champagne tonight, Nate, I said. He is sleeping in my bed. What do you need? Gus Nate asked. I need a federal indictment drafted. Ready to file at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Charges? Nate asked. I could hear the smile in his voice. He grabbed a pen. Title 18 U.S. Code Section 1038. False information and hoaxes regarding biological agents and delivery systems, specifically a bomb threat against a commercial airliner. Heavy Nate whistled. You have proof. I will have a spectral voice analysis from airport security in 45 minutes. It is a 100% match. And the second charge, I continued. Go on. Wire fraud. Using a telecommunications device to facilitate a scheme to defraud. He used that phone call to trigger a bank freeze under the Senior Safe Act to seize control of a $5 million trust. That is RICO territory, Gus Nate said. That is organized crime. You are talking about burying him. I am talking about Justice Nate. He tried to have me committed. He tried to erase me. I want him in handcuffs before he can spend a single dime of my brother's money. Done, Nate said. I will wake up the judge. I will get the warrant signed electronically. By the time the bank opens tomorrow, you will have a federal hold on Damon King. One more thing, Nate. Yeah. Don't execute the warrant at his house. No, Nate asked. No, I said. I looked out the window at the moon hanging over the Georgia pines. Execute it at the bank. I want him to walk in there thinking he owns the world. I want him to try to access the account, and I want him to feel the handcuffs click when he thinks he is grabbing the gold. You are a cold bastard. Gus. Nate laughed. I learned from the best, I said. I hung up the phone. The room was silent again, but it wasn't a prison cell anymore. It was a sniper's nest. I lay back on the bed. I didn't sleep. I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and replayed the plan in my head. David would get the voice match. Nate would get the warrant. And tomorrow morning, I would get my revenge. Tiffany thought she had drugged me. She thought I was drifting into a chemical fog. She didn't know that I was wider awake than I had been in 20 years. The sheep she thought she had locked in the guest room had just called the wolves, and when the sun came up, the slaughter would begin. I pulled the blanket up to my chin. It smelled of mothballs. It was the smell of the past. But tomorrow would smell like fresh ink on an indictment paper. I closed my eyes and waited for the dawn. The bass from the stereo system was vibrating through the floorboards of the living room. It was a deep rhythmic thumping that felt like a migraine trying to escape a skull. I sat in the corner near the fireplace, strapped into a wheelchair that I did not need. My legs were perfectly functional. My balance was fine. But a walking man is a threat, while a man in a wheelchair is a piece of furniture. Damon had insisted on it. He said it was for my safety. He said with all the people coming over, he didn't want me to get knocked down or lose my balance. But I knew the truth. He wanted me seated because it made him look taller. It made him look like the master of the house standing over his invalid father. The house was full of strangers. There were about 30 of them. They were friends of Damon and Tiffany, people I had never met, people who looked like they had been cut from the same magazine advertisement for superficial success. The men wore loafers without socks and shirts unbuttoned one button too low. The women wore dresses that cost more than my first car and held wine glasses by the stem, looking at my crown molding with calculating eyes. They were not here to celebrate a birthday or a holiday. They were here because Damon had sent out a text that morning. The text read, "The King Empire has arrived. Drinks on me." I sat there with a blanket tucked over my knees, my hands folded in my lap, staring at the chaos. They were drinking my wine. Not the cheap stuff, but the bottles I had laid down in the cellar 20 years ago. The Bordeaux from '95, the Cabernet from Napa Valley. I watched a young man with a spray tan spill a drop of red wine on Clara's Persian rug. He didn't even notice. He just laughed at something his friend said and ground the stain into the wool with his heel. I didn't say a word. I kept my face blank. My eyes were slightly glazed over a performance I had perfected over the last 24 hours. To them, I was just part of the scenery. I was the crazy old uncle, the cautionary tale, the burden that Damon was so heroically shouldering. Damon was in the center of the room holding court. He was holding a glass of scotch, my scotch in one hand and a cigar in the other. He was telling a story. "Yeah, it was tough," Damon said, his voice booming. "We had to go to court yesterday. Emergency hearing. The judge agreed immediately. Dad just isn't capable of managing the estate anymore. It is a lot of responsibility, you know, $5 million plus the land. It needs a modern touch. It needs vision." A chorus of sympathetic murmurs went through the room. "You are a saint, Damon," a woman in a red dress said, touching his arm. "Most people would just put him in a home and forget about him. But look at you keeping him here. That is so sweet." Damon looked over at me. He smiled a sad, martyred smile. "Well, he is family," Damon said. "And family comes first, even when it is hard, even when he doesn't recognize me half the time." I recognized him. I recognized every inch of him. I recognized the liar I had raised. I recognized the thief who was standing on my floorboards plotting to sell the ground beneath my feet. I listened closely as the conversation shifted. The alcohol was flowing freely now and tongues were getting loose. "So, what is the plan, man?" a guy named Brad asked. Brad was Damon's best friend from college. He was a real estate broker with a smile that looked like a shark bite. "You keeping the land or what?" Damon laughed. "Keep it. Are you kidding? It is prime commercial real estate near the airport logistics hub. I already have a buyer lined up. We are signing the letter of intent tomorrow at noon, cash deal. We are going to liquidate the trust, buy a penthouse in Buckhead, and put the rest into that crypto venture I told you about." I tightened my grip on the armrest of the wheelchair. He wasn't just stealing the money, he was gambling it. He was taking the legacy that my brother Otis had built over 40 years of sweat and tears, and he was going to throw it into a digital void. Otis had wanted that land to stay in the family. He wanted it to be a safety net for his grandchildren. Damon was going to turn it into a token on a screen. Brad whistled. $5 million into crypto. You have balls, man." Damon clinked his glass against Brad's. "Scared money doesn't make money, brother." The old man sat on that land for decades doing nothing, just letting it grow weeds. It is time to unleash the potential. Tiffany walked over then. She was glowing. She had clearly had too much champagne. She wrapped her arm around Damon's waist and leaned her head on his shoulder. "And we are getting rid of this dusty old museum," she said, waving her hand at the room. "Can you believe the furniture? It is so heavy. It is so dark. We are going to paint everything white. Open concept. We want it to look like a gallery, not a mausoleum." I looked at the mahogany bookshelf behind her. I had built that bookshelf with my own hands. I had sanded the wood, stained it, and varnished it. It took me 3 months of weekends. Now to her, it was just firewood. "Hey, check out the old guy," Brad said, pointing his glass at me. The circle of people turned to look. I didn't move. I stared at a spot on the wall, pretending to be lost in the fog of dementia. "He looks like he is rebooting." Brad laughed. "Does he even know what is happening?" Tiffany asked, giggling. "Not a clue," Damon said. "He took his pills an hour ago. He is in L.A. La Land." Brad walked over to me. He stood right in front of the wheelchair, blocking my view of the room. He smelled of gin and arrogance. He leaned down, putting his face close to mine. "Hey, Gus," he said loudly, like he was talking to a deaf person. "You enjoying the party, buddy?" I didn't blink. I let my jaw go slack. Brad turned back to the group. You know Damon? Brad said, his voice dropping just enough to be conspiratorial, but loud enough for everyone to hear. It is actually kind of fitting. What is Damon asked? Seeing him like this, Brad said, gesturing with his drink. I mean, no offense, man, but your dad, he always had that look right. Even when he was the big bad security director, he always looked a little bit like, well, you know, like what Tiffany asked sipping her wine, like the help Brad said. The room went quiet for a second. I mean, look at him, Brad continued chuckling. Sitting there in that suit holding a blanket. He looks like the chauffeur waiting in the lobby, or the butler waiting to take our coats. It is just natural. You know what I mean? Some people are born to lead and some people are born to sit in the corner and wait for orders. It is just genetics, man. My heart stopped. The blood in my veins turned to ice and then to fire. It wasn't just an insult. It was a razor blade aimed at my history, my dignity, and my race. It was a dismissal of every battle I had fought, every ceiling I had broken, every sacrifice I had made to ensure that my son would never have to hear words like that. I looked at Damon. This was the moment. This was the test. A stranger had just insulted his father in his own house. A stranger had just reduced a decorated veteran and a director of security to a servant based on the color of his skin and his age. Damon looked at Brad. He looked at me. And then he smiled. Yeah, Damon said with a shrug. I guess you are right. He was always good at following orders. That is why he stayed in the same job for 30 years while the rest of the world moved on. He is a worker bee. We are the kings. Tiffany laughed, a high, piercing sound. You are terrible, Brad, she said, slapping his arm playfully. But you are kind of right. He does look like he should be holding a tray of appetizers. The whole group laughed. It was a wave of sound that crashed over me, drowning me in their contempt. They were laughing at the soldier who protected their flights. They were laughing at the father who paid their tuitions. They were laughing at the man whose house they were standing in. I looked down at my hands, the hands that had held a rifle in the jungle, the hands that had signed million-dollar contracts, the hands that had cradled Damon when he was a baby. They were shaking. Not from age, not from fear, but from the sheer kinetic energy of the violence I was holding back. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to flip the wheelchair. I wanted to take the wine glass from Brad's hand and smash it into his smiling teeth. I wanted to throw Damon through the window and drag Tiffany out by her hair. But I didn't. I took a deep breath. I swallowed the rage. I compressed it. I packed it down into the deepest part of my gut like gunpowder in a shell casing. If I reacted now, if I exploded now, I would lose. They would call the police. They would say I was violent. They would use my anger as proof of my instability. They would sedate me and ship me to the home before the sun came up. No. The victory had to be total. It had to be absolute. I looked up at Brad. I looked him right in the eye. For a split second, he faltered. He saw something in my gaze that didn't fit the narrative of the senile old man. He saw a predator looking at prey. But then I blinked. I let my head loll to the side. I let a little bit of drool form at the corner of my mouth. Can I have some water? I whispered, my voice cracking. Brad laughed again, relieved. Sure, buddy, he said. Damon, get your butler some water. Damon rolled his eyes and walked toward the kitchen. I closed my eyes. I engraved this moment into my memory. I memorized the sound of their laughter. I memorized the smell of their perfume. I memorized the feeling of the wheelchair pressing against my back. Laugh, I thought. Laugh while you can. Because tomorrow there will be no laughter. Tomorrow there will only be the sound of steel cuffs clicking shut. The party went on for another 3 hours. I sat there the whole time. I watched them get drunk. I watched them make plans for spending my money. I watched them disrespect everything I held sacred. And with every passing minute, my resolve hardened. I wasn't just going to take back the money, I was going to destroy them. I was going to burn their little world to the ground and leave them standing in the ashes with nothing but their arrogance to keep them warm. When the last guest finally left at 2 a.m, Damon wheeled me back to the guest room. He didn't say goodnight. He just pushed the chair into the room and closed the door. He didn't lock it this time. He was too drunk to remember. Or maybe he just didn't think I was capable of opening it. He was wrong. I stood up from the wheelchair. I stretched my legs. I walked to the window and looked out at the moon. The party was over. The guests were gone. But the real event was scheduled for 9 a.m., and I was going to be the master of ceremonies. The sun rose over downtown Atlanta at 6:45 in the morning, burning through the mist and reflecting off the glass towers of the financial district. I was parked across the street from the First National Bank main branch in my beat-up rental car. I had been there for hours. My neck was stiff and my eyes felt like they were filled with grit, but I was wide awake. I was running on the kind of cold, hard adrenaline that keeps a soldier moving when his body has nothing left to give. I had a cup of coffee on the dashboard and a clear view of the bank's revolving doors. At 8:55, a silver Mercedes pulled up to the curb in the no parking zone. It was Damon's car. He stepped out first, adjusting his suit jacket. He looked like $1 million. He was wearing a navy blue suit that was tailored to within an inch of its life and sunglasses that probably cost more than my first car. He walked around to the passenger side and opened the door for Tiffany. She emerged like a queen stepping onto her balcony. She was wearing a white dress and carrying a designer handbag that I knew she had charged to my credit card before I cut her off. They looked victorious. They looked untouchable. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at the bank building as if they already owned it. I saw Damon check his watch. He said something to Tiffany and she laughed, throwing her head back. It was the laugh of someone who thinks the war is over and she is standing on the winning side. They didn't see me. They didn't see the gray sedan with the dented bumper parked between a delivery truck and a dumpster. To them, I was invisible. I was the past. I was a problem they had solved with a court order and a bottle of pills. I watched them walk toward the bank entrance. The security guard held the door open for them. Damon nodded to the guard with a dismissive arrogance that made my stomach turn. He walked with a strut of bounce in his step that said he was about to become a very rich man. I took a sip of my cold coffee. "Go ahead, son," I whispered to the windshield. "Walk in there. Walk into the cage." I knew exactly what was happening inside. I knew the layout of that bank better than I knew the back of my hand because I had consulted on their security protocols 10 years ago. I closed my eyes and visualized the scene playing out. Damon would walk up to the teller counter, bypassing the line of regular people waiting to cash their paychecks. He would slap the court order on the marble counter. He would demand to see the branch manager. He wouldn't ask. He would demand. "I need to liquidate the King family trust." He would say, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I am the conservator. Here is the judge's order. Wire everything to this account number." The teller, a young woman named Sarah, whom I had known since she was an intern, would look at the paper. She would see the seal of the Cook County Court. She would see the signature of Judge Vance. She would see the declaration that Augustus King was incapacitated and mentally unfit. She would type my name into the system. Her fingers would fly across the keyboard. And then she would stop. Her brow would furrow. She would type it again. The screen would flash a red alert, a specific code that only appeared for high-level security accounts. Level 5 restriction. Executive Protocol Omega. She would look up at Damon, her face pale. "I am sorry, sir," she would say. "I cannot process this transaction. I need to get the manager." Damon would huff. He would tap his fingers on the counter. He would look at Tiffany and roll his eyes. "Typical incompetence," he would whisper. "We are moving this money to a private bank as soon as this hits." Mr. Henderson, the branch manager, would come out of his glass office. He was a good man, a serious man who wore suspenders and took his job very seriously. He would take the court order. He would read it carefully. He would look at Damon, then at Tiffany. Mr. King Henderson would say, "This court order states that your father, Augustus King, has been declared legally incapacitated due to dementia and is no longer fit to manage his affairs. Is that correct?" "Yes," Damon would answer, puffing out his chest. "It is a tragedy, really. But the court has appointed me to take over. We need to secure the assets immediately." Henderson would nod slowly. He would look at the screen. He would press a single key. And that was the moment. That was the moment the trap would spring. You see, 10 years ago when Otis and I set up the trust, we sat in that very office. We looked at the future and we saw the risks. We knew our children. We knew their weaknesses. Otis knew his kids were spendthrifts. I knew Damon had a gambling streak even back then. We wanted to protect the legacy not just for them, but from them. So we added a clause buried deep in the bylaws of the trust, written in dense legal language that Damon never bothered to read because he was too busy looking at the bottom line. It was a dead man's switch. The clause was simple. If the primary executor, Augustus King, dies, the management passes to the next of kin. But if the primary executor is declared mentally incapacitated by a court of law due to a challenge from a beneficiary, the trust assumes a hostile takeover attempt. Under those specific circumstances, the assets are not transferred to the guardian. Instead, the trust is automatically dissolved and the entire balance is donated to a pre-selected charitable organization. We chose the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. We chose it because we wanted the money to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. We wanted it to go to justice, not to Ferraris and nose jobs. I imagined Henderson's voice calm and professional. I am afraid there is a misunderstanding, Mr. King. Based on this court order which you have provided proving your father's incapacity, the trust has been liquidated. Liquidated? Damon would ask, his smile faltering. Great. So where is the money? Is it in the holding account? No, sir, Henderson would say. Per the bylaws of the King Family Trust, Article 4, Section C, in the event of the executor's incapacity triggered by legal action from a family member, the funds are automatically wired to the designated beneficiary. Beneficiary Damon would scream. I am the beneficiary. I am the son. No, Sir, Henderson would correct him. The beneficiary is the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. The transfer was initiated the moment you presented this order and confirmed your father's status. $5,200,000 has just been sent. The account balance is zero. I opened my eyes. I looked at the bank doors. It had been 15 minutes. Suddenly, the revolving doors spun violently. Damon burst out onto the sidewalk. He wasn't walking with a strut anymore. He was stumbling. He looked like a man who had just been shot in the gut. His face was a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. He was clutching the court order in his hand, crumpling it into a ball. Tiffany ran out after him. She was screaming something, but the glass doors muffled her voice. She grabbed Damon's arm, shaking him. She looked frantic. Her sunglasses had fallen off. Her perfect composure was shattered. Damon pulled away from her. He spun around in a circle on the sidewalk, looking wild. He ran his hands through his hair, messing up his perfect cut. He was hyperventilating. He knew what this meant. It didn't just mean he was broke. It meant he was dead. The loan sharks in Buckhead weren't waiting for a court order. They were waiting for a wire transfer. Noon today. That was the deadline. If he didn't pay them $200,000 plus interest, they were going to come for him. And they wouldn't bring paperwork. They would bring baseball bats. He patted his pockets frantically. He pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking so bad he almost dropped it. He dialed a number. Inside my rental car, the burner phone on the passenger seat began to buzz. I picked it up. I didn't answer immediately. I watched him. I watched my son, realizing that he had just played himself. He had lied to a judge to prove I was crazy, and that lie was the exact thing that cost him the fortune. I pressed the green button. I put the phone to my ear. Hello, Damon. Dad? Damon's voice was a high-pitched screech. Dad, where are you? You have to help me. There is a mistake. The bank, the money. It is gone, Dad. It is all gone. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It is not gone, Damon. It is exactly where Otis and I wanted it to be. It is safe. Dad, you don't understand? Damon sobbed. He was crying now, right there on the street in front of everyone. I need that money. I owe people, Dad. Bad people. They are going to kill me. You have to call the bank. You have to tell them you are fine. You have to reverse it. I watched him drop to his knees on the pavement. Tiffany was standing over him, looking at her phone, probably checking her own accounts, realizing that the gravy train had just derailed. I can't do that, Damon, I said, my voice calm and cold. You went to court, son. You proved I was incapacitated. You convinced a judge. You convinced the world. I am just a senile old man, remember. I can't authorize a transfer. I don't even know what day it is. Isn't that what you told your friends at the party last night? Dad, please, Damon screamed. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I will do anything. Just come to the bank, please. I looked at the clock on the dashboard. It was 9:20. The FBI warrant that Nate had drafted would be in the system by now. David Patterson from Airport Security would have sent the voice match evidence over an hour ago. I am nearby, Damon, I said. You are? Damon asked, looking around wildly. Where? Where are you, Dad? I am watching you, I said. I started the engine of the rental car. I pulled out from the parking spot. I drove slowly across the intersection. I rolled down the window. Damon saw me. He saw the beat-up gray sedan. He saw his father sitting in the driver's seat wearing the wrinkled blue suit. Dad, he yelled, scrambling to his feet. He started running toward the car. Dad, wait, stop. I didn't stop. I didn't speed up either. I just let the car roll forward. I am not the one coming for you, Damon, I said into the phone. What? Damon gasped, stopping in the middle of the street. What do you mean? I mean, look behind you, son. Damon turned around. 2 black SUVs had just pulled up to the curb where the Mercedes was parked. 4 men in windbreakers with yellow letters on the back jumped out. FBI. Damon dropped the phone. I heard it hit the pavement. I watched through the rearview mirror. I saw Damon freeze. I saw Tiffany try to back away, trying to blend into the crowd, but one of the agents pointed at her too. I saw the handcuffs come out. The sun glinted off the metal. It was the same sun that had risen on a victorious Damon King 20 minutes ago. Now it was shining on a felon. I kept driving. I didn't turn back. The image of my son being shoved into the back of a federal vehicle was not something I needed to see twice. I had seen the beginning of his corruption, and now I had seen the end. The money was gone. The son was gone. The house was empty. I was alone. But as I merged into the morning traffic of Atlanta, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt light. The heavy burden of trying to save someone who didn't want to be saved was lifted. I picked up the phone again. I dialed Nate. It is done, I said. I know, Nate replied. They just radioed in. We got him. Wire fraud and making false terrorist threats. He is going away, Gus. For a long time. Good, I said. And Gus Nate added, the bank manager called me. He said the transfer to the NAACP went through. That is a hell of a donation. It wasn't a donation, Nate, I said, looking at the road ahead. It was a ransom payment. I paid $5 million to get my dignity back. And it was worth every penny. I hung up. I turned on the radio. A jazz station was playing Miles Davis. So what? Exactly. So what? I drove on. I had one more stop to make. The house. My house. It was time to take out the trash. The silence in the house was heavy, the kind of silence that happens right before a tornado touches down. I was back in the living room, sitting in that wheelchair, the same prop I had used to deceive them the night before. I had positioned myself right in the center of the room facing the front door. I was not hiding. I was waiting. I had a glass of water in my hand, and I was watching the dust motes dance in the shaft of sunlight that cut across the floor, the same floor they planned to rip out, the same floor my wife had polished on her hands and knees. I heard them before I saw them. The sound of Damon's Mercedes tearing up the driveway engine, screaming tires screeching against the asphalt. He didn't park the car, he abandoned it. I heard the heavy thud of a car door slamming shut, a sound so violent it rattled the window panes. Then footsteps. Running. Stumbling. Desperate footsteps pounding up the walkway. The front door didn't just open. It exploded inward. Damon stood there framed in the doorway. He looked like a man who had stared into the abyss, and the abyss had spat him back out. His tie was undone, hanging loose around his neck like a noose. His expensive Italian suit jacket was torn at the shoulder, probably from when he had tried to claw his way back into the bank manager's office. His hair was wild, his eyes bloodshot and wide with panic. He was sweating profusely, a cold, clammy sweat that made his skin look gray. Behind him, Tiffany hovered like a ghost. She had lost her shoes. She was barefoot, holding her designer heels in one hand, her makeup smeared down her cheeks. She didn't look arrogant anymore. She looked terrified. Damon saw me. He saw his father sitting in the wheelchair, calm and composed, holding a glass of water. The sight of me seemed to snap the last thread of sanity holding him together. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask if I was okay. He let out a roar, a primal, animalistic sound of pure rage, and lunged at me. He crossed the room in 3 strides. He grabbed the lapels of my robe, the silk robe Tiffany had forced me to wear, and yanked me forward. The water glass fell from my hand and shattered on the floor, but neither of us looked at it. "You," he screamed, spitting saliva into my face. "You old bastard, what did you do? What did you do with the money?" He shook me. My head snapped back and forth, but I didn't resist. Not yet. I let him pour his fury out. I let him dig the hole deeper. "The account is empty," Damon yelled, his voice cracking into a sob. "Zero. It says 0. The manager said you moved it. He said it went to a charity. Are you insane? That was my money. That was my future. You stole my life." He tightened his grip on my collar, twisting the fabric until it cut into my neck. He was close enough that I could smell the fear on him. It smelled like sour milk and burnt rubber. "Undo it," he hissed, shaking me again. Call the bank right now. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you are senile. Tell them you pressed the wrong button. Get my money back or I swear to God I will." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The threat was in his eyes. He was ready to hurt me. He was ready to strike his own father to get back the fortune he thought he deserved. That was the line. He had crossed the line of disrespect years ago. He had crossed the line of negligence when he let his mother die. But now he had crossed the line of physical threat. And in my world, in the world of men who have served and bled, you do not threaten a superior officer unless you are prepared to die. I looked at his hands gripping my robe. Soft hands. Hands that had never held a shovel, never held a rifle, never held anything heavier than a gaming controller. I let go of the armrests. I planted my feet flat on the floor. Damon didn't notice. He was too busy screaming. I stood up. I didn't struggle to stand. I didn't wobble. I rose with the fluid, powerful motion of a man who has kept his body a weapon for 7 decades. As I stood, I broke his grip. I knocked his hands away with a sharp upward strike of my forearms. Damon stumbled back. He looked at me, his eyes bulging. He looked at the wheelchair, then at my legs, then at my face. He looked like he was seeing a magic trick he couldn't explain. You can walk?" he stammered. I stepped over the shattered glass. I didn't need the cane. I didn't need the chair. I towered over him. I am 6'2", Damon is 5'10". But in that moment I felt 10 feet tall. I walked toward him. He took a step back, tripping over his own feet. "Dad, wait," he said, holding up his hands. I didn't wait. I pulled my right arm back. I didn't throw a wild haymaker like a drunk in a bar. I threw a straight cross. Technical, precise, devastating. My fist connected with his jaw. Crack. The sound was sickeningly loud in the quiet house. It was the sound of bone meeting bone. The sound of discipline meeting entitlement. Damon's head snapped to the side. His legs gave out instantly. He dropped to the floor like a sack of wet cement. He didn't get up. He lay there sprawled on the Persian rug he had let his friend stain, clutching his jaw, groaning in shock and pain. I stood over him, rubbing my knuckles. They throbbed, but it was a good pain. It was the pain of action. "Your money," I said. My voice was low, steady, and cold as ice. I looked down at him, curling into a fetal position. "You called it your money, Damon." I crouched down so he could see my face, so he could see the fire in my eyes. "You have never earned $1 in this house, Damon. Every shirt on your back I paid for. Every meal you ate I bought. The car you drove here, the gas in the tank, the phone in your pocket, it all came from my sweat. It came from double shifts at the airport. It came from walking patrol in the rain while you slept in a warm bed." Damon whimpered, trying to crawl away from me. "You think because you share my blood you are entitled to my sweat?" I asked. "You think inheritance is a right. It is not a right, Damon. It is a trust. And you broke that trust. You broke it when you let your mother die. You broke it when you called the airport. You broke it when you tried to put me in a warehouse for the dying." I stood up again and looked around the room. "This is not your money. It never was. It was my brother's life work. And since you proved you couldn't be a son, you don't get to be an heir." Suddenly a scream cut through the air. Tiffany. She had been standing by the door, paralyzed by shock. But now, seeing her golden goose lying on the floor bleeding, she found her voice. She rushed forward, dropping her shoes. She knelt beside Damon, touching his swelling face. She looked up at me with eyes full of venom. "You monster!" she screamed. "You crazy old psycho, you assaulted him. I saw it. I saw everything." "Call them," I repeated, stepping closer. "Tell them Augustus King just punched his son. Tell them to send a squad car." I leaned in close, towering over her kneeling form. "But while you are on the line, Tiffany, do me a favor. Tell them to check the federal warrant database. Tell them to bring the agents who are currently looking for a man named Damon King for wire fraud and making false terrorist threats." Tiffany's mouth fell open. The phone in her hand lowered slowly. What did you say?" she whispered. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "You didn't think I spent the night sleeping, did you?" I asked. "While you were throwing your party, I was talking to the FBI. While you were toasting to my death, I was signing the affidavit for your arrest." I pointed at Damon, who was starting to sit up, clutching his jaw, his eyes wide with a new kind of terror. "The money is gone, Damon. It is with the NAACP now. You can't get it back. But the charges, those are yours to keep." 5 years for the bomb threat, 10 for the fraud. Damon looked at Tiffany. Tiffany looked at Damon. The realization hit them both at the same time. The trap hadn't just snapped shut on their fingers, it had snapped shut on their necks. "You are lying," Tiffany stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. "You are bluffing. You are just a lonely old man. You don't know the FBI." I checked my watch. "They are about 3 minutes away," I said. "I told them I would hold you here. I told them you might be violent." I looked at Damon's bleeding lip. "And look at that," I said. I was right. It looks like there was a struggle. Self-defense is a powerful thing, son. Sirens. Faint at first, but growing louder. The distinctive wail of law enforcement approaching. Not one car. Many. Damon struggled to his feet. He looked at the door. He looked at the back window. He looked like a rat trapped in a maze. "Dad, please," he cried, tears mixing with the blood on his chin. "Dad, don't let them take me. I am your son." I turned my back on him. I walked over to the bookshelf, the one they wanted to burn, and picked up a record. Miles Davis. Kind of Blue. "I am not your father, Damon," I said without turning around. "I am the witness for the prosecution." The sirens were loud now right outside the house. Blue lights flashed through the front window, painting the walls in spasms of color. I sat back down in the wheelchair, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to be comfortable when the show started. "Open the door, Tiffany," I said. "Your ride is here." The sirens were screaming now, a cacophony of wailing mechanical banshees that seemed to be tearing the air apart right on my front lawn. Blue and red lights were strobing through the front window, cutting through the gloom of the living room like disco lights from hell. Damon was backed into the corner near the fireplace, wiping blood from his lip with the sleeve of his ruined Italian suit. Tiffany was frozen by the sofa, her face a mask of smudged mascara and terror. They were looking at the door, waiting for the inevitable knock. But I wasn't looking at the door. I was looking at my phone. I sat back in the wheelchair, crossing my legs. I felt remarkably calm. It was the calm of a pilot who has just lined up the perfect landing after flying through a hurricane. "You know, Damon," I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the sirens, "you made one critical mistake in your plan. You assumed that technology only works for the young. You thought because I listen to vinyl records and drive a gas car that I don't understand how the digital world works." Damon looked at me. His eyes were darting back and forth. "What are you talking about?" he rasped. "Just let us go, Dad. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Please." I held up my phone. The screen was glowing. "You used a voice changer app," I continued. "I saw the metadata on the file. You bought a 99-cent app from the store thinking it would mask your identity. You deepened your pitch. You added some digital static. You thought you sounded like a generic anonymous tipster." I tapped the screen. "But here is the thing about sound, Damon. It is physics. You can warp it, you can stretch it, but you cannot erase the source. Every voice has a fingerprint, a unique spectral signature based on the shape of your vocal cords, the spacing of your teeth, even the way you breathe." I looked at Tiffany. She was listening now. She knew something bad was coming. "I sent the recording to a friend of mine," I said. "A man named Jimmy Chen. He used to work for the NSA before he went into private audio forensics. He stripped away the digital layers you added. He removed the static. He reversed the pitch modulation. It took him about 20 minutes. I pressed the volume button on the side of the phone all the way up. Do you want to hear what you sound like when you are stripped naked, son?" I didn't wait for an answer. I pressed play. The sound that came out of the small speaker was not tinny. It was crystal clear. It was loud. It filled the living room, echoing off the walls that Damon had planned to tear down. There was a second of silence on the recording. And then the voice. It was not a robot. It was not a stranger. It was Damon. Unmistakable. Undeniable. "I have a tip regarding a passenger on Flight 492 to Chicago." The voice on the recording paused. I watched the real Damon in the corner flinch as if he had been whipped. "His name is Augustus King. He is a former security director, but he has snapped. He is carrying an improvised explosive device in his briefcase. He has been off his medication for weeks. He is hearing voices. He is paranoid and dangerous. You have to stop him. He is going to bring the plane down." The recording ended. I pressed stop. The silence that followed was heavier than the sirens outside. It was a suffocating silence. Damon slid down the wall until he hit the floor. He pulled his knees up to his chest. He looked like a child who had just broken a window and knew the belt was coming. But this wasn't a broken window, and I wasn't holding a belt. Tiffany put her hand over her mouth. She stared at Damon with a look of absolute revulsion. It wasn't because he had done it. She knew he had done it. It was because he had been caught. It was because his stupidity had just destroyed her life. That is not me, Damon whispered. It was a weak, pathetic lie, a reflex. I shook my head slowly. Don't insult my intelligence, Damon. And don't insult the FBI agents who are walking up the driveway right now. Jimmy sent over the spectral analysis report too. It is a 99.9% match to your voice interview from 2 years ago. It is biometric proof. I wheeled the chair closer to him. I wanted him to see my face. I wanted him to see that there was no mercy left in me. Do you know what Title 18 of the United States Code Section 1038 says, Damon? He didn't answer. He was shaking. It covers false information and hoaxes regarding terrorist threats, I recited. I knew the code by heart. I had taught it to rookies for 30 years. It says that anyone who knowingly conveys false information concerning an attempt to destroy an aircraft or kill passengers shall be fined or imprisoned. I leaned forward. And do you know the mandatory minimum sentence for a threat that results in a significant disruption of federal transportation services and the deployment of tactical assets? 5 years, Damon. 5 years in a federal penitentiary, not the county jail, not a minimum security camp. Federal prison, Leavenworth, Marion, places where they don't care about your Italian suits or your crypto wallet. Damon began to sob. It was a dry, hacking sound. Dad, please, he choked out. 5 years. I can't do 5 years. I will die in there. Oh, it gets better, I said mercilessly. Because you used a telecommunications device to do it across state lines to facilitate a wire fraud scheme, stealing $5 million from a trust fund, that is a RICO predicate act. That is organized crime. The prosecutor can stack the charges. I held up 3 fingers. 5 for the bomb threat, 10 for the wire fraud. And because you targeted a senior citizen under the color of a guardianship abuse statute, that is an aggravating factor. I lowered my hand. You are looking at 20 years, Damon. You are 30 years old. You will be 50 when you get out. You will miss the prime of your life. You will miss everything. And do you know the best part? I pointed to the window where the flashing lights were joined by the sound of heavy boots on the porch. There is no bail. Damon looked up, his face streaked with tears and blood. What? The Patriot Act, I said softly. When the charge involves a threat of terrorism against mass transit, flight risk is presumed. The judge cannot grant bail. You are going from this living room directly to a holding cell, and you will stay there until your trial. You are not going home tonight. You are not going home ever. The front door shook. Someone was pounding on it with a heavy fist. FBI. Open up. Search warrant. Damon scrambled to his feet. For a second, I thought he was going to run. I thought he was going to try to jump through the back window, but he didn't have the legs for it. He didn't have the heart for it. He just stood there, swaying, looking at me with eyes that were screaming for a savior. Help me, Dad, he whispered. Please. I am your son. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had left my wife to die on the floor. I looked at the man who had tried to erase my existence for a check. I picked up the remote control for the television. I turned it on. I turned the volume up. I didn't look at him. I have no son, I said. My son died 3 years ago when he let his mother die. You are just a defendant. I looked over at Tiffany. She was backing away toward the kitchen, trying to put distance between herself and Damon. And you, Tiffany, I said, you are an accessory. You knew. You were part of the conspiracy. You think because you didn't make the call, you are safe. She shook her head violently. No, I didn't know. He told me it was handled. I didn't know he called in a bomb threat. Augustus, please. The pounding on the door got louder. Open the door or we will breach. I looked at Tiffany. If you want any chance of seeing the outside world before you are old and gray, I suggest you open that door. And I suggest you start talking. The first one to cut a deal usually gets the lighter sentence. Tiffany didn't hesitate. She didn't look at Damon. She didn't say goodbye. She kicked off her high heels so she could run faster. She sprinted to the door. She unlocked it and threw it open. I heard her screaming to the agents. It was him. It was all him. He forced me. I have proof. Damon watched her go. The betrayal was complete. The circle was closed. He had betrayed his father for money, and now his wife was betraying him for freedom. The agents swarmed into the room. They were wearing tactical gear, holding rifles at the low ready. They saw me sitting in the wheelchair. They saw Damon standing by the fireplace, bleeding and weeping. "Get on the ground. Now." Damon didn't move fast enough. 2 agents grabbed him. They spun him around. They kicked his legs out from under him. He hit the floor hard. I heard the zip ties cinch tight. "Dad," Damon screamed, his face pressed into the rug. "Dad, help me." I watched the agents haul him up. He couldn't walk. They had to drag him. His expensive shoes scraped across the hardwood floor, leaving black scuff marks. One of the agents, a tall man with a beard, stopped in front of me. He looked at the wheelchair. He looked at the bruise on Damon's jaw. "Are you okay, sir?" he asked. I looked up at him. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. "I am fine, Agent," I said. "Just a little tired. Do you need medical attention?" "No," I said. "I just need you to take the trash out." The agent nodded. He signaled to his team. They marched Damon out the door. I watched through the window as they shoved him into the back of the black SUV. I watched Tiffany being led to a separate car, handcuffed, crying hysterically. The sirens stopped. The lights stopped flashing. The cars pulled away one by one, disappearing down the long driveway. The house was quiet again. The only sound was the jazz music playing softly from the record player I had turned on earlier. Miles Davis, "Blue in Green," a sad, beautiful song. I sat there for a long time. I looked at the empty room. I looked at the spot on the rug where my son had fallen. It was done. The evidence was irrefutable. The law was absolute. She looked at Damon lying on the floor in handcuffs. Then she looked at the armed agents, and finally she looked at me. In that split second, I saw the calculation in her eyes. It was a cold biological survival mechanism. She realized that the King dynasty she had married into was not just crumbling, it was incinerating. And Tiffany was not the kind of woman who burned. She was the kind of woman who walked over the ashes of others to keep her shoes clean. She dropped to her knees. It was a theatrical drop, perfectly timed. She clasped her hands together, and tears began to flow down her cheeks, as if she had a faucet installed behind her eyes. "Dad," she wailed. Her voice was shrill, piercing the tension in the room. "Oh God, Dad, please tell them. Tell them I had nothing to do with this." I sat in my wheelchair watching her performance with the detached interest of a critic watching a bad play. She crawled toward me just a few inches, ignoring Damon completely. "See, Dad, he is trying to drag me down with him. He is a monster. I was a victim in this house, just like you." She looked up at the FBI agent standing nearest to her. Her eyes were wide, pleading, innocent. "Officer, I can testify," she said breathlessly. "I have access to his emails. I know where he hid the crypto keys. I can give you everything. Just please don't arrest me. I am innocent. I am just a poor girl who married the wrong man." The room went silent. The betrayal was absolute. It hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Damon let his head drop back onto the rug. He didn't say anything else. He just made a low sound deep in his throat, a sound of something breaking inside him that had nothing to do with bones. I reached down to the side pocket of my wheelchair. "That is a very moving speech, Tiffany," I said. My voice was calm, dry. "You almost had me convinced. The weeping victim, the coerced wife. It is a good angle." I pulled out a thick manila envelope. It was not the blue folder I had given the FBI earlier. This was a different file, one I had compiled personally over the last 6 months with the help of a forensic accountant who owed me a favor. I tapped the envelope against the armrest of my chair. "But there is a problem with your story, Tiffany." She wiped her eyes, hoping against hope that I was buying her act. "What problem, Dad?" "The problem is math," I said. I opened the envelope. I pulled out a stack of papers stapled together. They were bank statements. Detailed, itemized, colorful bank statements from the joint checking account she shared with Damon. "You see, I continued while Damon was busy losing my money in the crypto markets. You were busy managing the household finances. Or at least that is what you told him." I looked at Damon. "Son, look at me." Damon looked up. His eyes were dead. "You thought you were broke because the market was down," I said. "You thought you were living paycheck to paycheck because of inflation. But you weren't broke, Damon. You were being bled." I threw the papers onto the floor. They fanned out, landing right in front of Damon's face. "Look at the withdrawals, Damon. Look at the transfers." Damon squinted. He shifted his body, struggling against the zip ties, trying to focus on the numbers. Start with page 3, I suggested, helpful as ever. January 12th. A wire transfer for $4,000. Recipient: Mama Bear, LLC. Tiffany stopped crying instantly. Her face went pale, a sickly shade of gray that matched the walls she hated so much. That is her mother, Damon, I explained. Tiffany has been sending $4,000 a month to her parents in Florida for the last 2 years. That is nearly $100,000 of your money Damon sent to pay off her father's boat and her mother's bingo debts. While you were borrowing from loan sharks to buy groceries, she was financing her parents' retirement. Damon's eyes widened. He looked at Tiffany. She shook her head, mouthing, "No, it is not true. But that is just the appetizer," I said, flipping to the next page. Here is the main course. Look at the recurring payments labeled personal training and wellness consulting. I pointed to a line item, $2,500 a month, every month, for 3 years. Damon looked at Tiffany. "Who is that?" he whispered. "You work out at the YMCA. It costs $40 a month." I laughed. A dry, humorless bark. "Oh, she is not working out at the YMCA, son. These payments go to an account registered to a Mr. Kyle Donovan." Tiffany gasped. She looked like she was about to vomit. "Who is Kyle?" Damon asked. His voice was getting louder. "Who is Kyle?" Tiffany. I pulled a photograph out of the envelope. It was a grainy photo taken by a private investigator. It showed Tiffany sitting at a cafe table holding hands with a young man who looked like he spent more time in a tanning bed than in a library. He was wearing a tight t-shirt. He was about 25 years old. "Kyle is 26, I said, reading from the report. "He is a spin instructor. And apparently he is also an aspiring DJ. Your wife has been funding his equipment, his studio time, and his apartment rent for the last 18 months. I dropped the photo. It landed face up next to Damon's face. "You were stealing from your father to pay off your debts," I said, looking at Damon. "And your wife was stealing from you to pay for her boyfriend." Damon stared at the photo. He stared at the man holding his wife's hand, the man who was living on his dime, the man who was sleeping with his wife while Damon was stressing about money. A sound ripped out of Damon. It wasn't a scream. It was a howl. It was the sound of a man realizing that he was not the hero of his own story. He was the mark. He was the fool. He had burned his bridge with his father, the only person who had ever truly loved him, for a woman who saw him as nothing more than a host organism to be drained. You... Damon sputtered, struggling to find the words. He tried to lunge at Tiffany, but the agents held him down. "You stole from me. I killed my family for you. I risked prison for you. And you were paying for a DJ." Tiffany stood up. The mask was gone. The victim act was gone. She looked cornered and vicious. "He listened to me," she spat at Damon. "He paid attention to me. You were always too busy with your stupid games and your stupid crypto. You were boring, Damon. You were pathetic. I needed a life. And you paid for it with my money," Damon screamed. "Not your money," Tiffany yelled back. "Your dad's money. It was all his money anyway. You never earned a dime." The silence that followed that statement was profound. Even the FBI agents looked uncomfortable. Tiffany had just admitted everything. She had just admitted that she viewed me simply as a resource, and Damon simply as a conduit. I looked at the lead agent. "I believe that confession is admissible, Agent," I said quietly. The agent nodded. He gestured to his partner. "Tiffany Stevens, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and embezzlement." 2 agents moved toward her. Tiffany screamed. She tried to run toward the back door, but she was barefoot and panicked. The agents caught her before she took 3 steps. They spun her around. The sound of the handcuffs clicking on her wrists was distinct, louder and sharper than it had been for Damon. "Get your hands off me," she shrieked, kicking and thrashing. "This is a mistake. I will sue you. My father knows people. Your father is spending stolen money in Florida." "Tiffany," I said. "I imagine the FBI will be paying him a visit shortly to recover the assets." They dragged her past me. She looked at me one last time. Her eyes were full of hate. "I hope you die alone, old man," she hissed. I looked at her calmly. "I may die alone, Tiffany, but I will die free, and I will die with my name clean. You will die in a cage known only as inmate number something or other." They hauled her out the front door. Her screams faded as they put her in the car. I looked back at Damon. He was still lying on the floor. He wasn't fighting the cuffs anymore. He wasn't trying to get up. He was staring at the ceiling, tears streaming silently into his ears. He looked broken in a way that couldn't be fixed. He had lost his inheritance. He had lost his freedom. And in the last 5 minutes, he had lost the illusion that he was loved. He looked at me. "Dad," he whispered. It was barely audible. I looked at him. I felt a twinge of pain deep in my chest. The ghost of the love I once had for him. But I pushed it down. I covered it with the memory of Clara dying on the floor. I covered it with the memory of the bomb threat. "Don't," I said softly. "Don't call me that." I signaled the agents. "Take him." 2 agents lifted Damon up. He didn't walk. He dragged his feet like a dead man. As they passed me, he didn't look at me. He looked at the floor, at the scattered bank statements that detailed the price of his betrayal. The door closed behind them. I was alone in the living room. The sun was fully up now. It illuminated the dust dancing in the air. It illuminated the shattered glass on the floor. It illuminated the emptiness. I rolled my wheelchair over to the photo of Tiffany and her boyfriend. I picked it up. I looked at it for a moment. Then I ripped it in half. I dropped the pieces in the trash can. I took a deep breath. The air in the house felt lighter. It smelled of coffee and old wood, not perfume and lies. I stood up from the chair. I stretched my back. It ached, but it was a good ache. I walked to the kitchen. I needed a broom. I had a lot of mess to clean up before I could start my life over. And for the first time in years, I was looking forward to the work. The house was quiet now, except for the heavy breathing of the man lying face down on my Persian rug and the static crackle of the radios on the chests of the federal agents. Tiffany was gone. Her screams had faded down the street, leaving a ringing silence in their wake. Now it was just me, my son, and the consequences of his ambition. I watched the lead agent, a man named Harris, whom I had recommended for the academy 15 years ago, reach down and pull Damon up. Damon didn't have the strength to stand. His legs were jelly. His expensive Italian suit pants were stained with dust and sweat. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. He looked like a boy who had put on his father's clothes and found they were far too heavy to carry. Harris looked at me. He didn't say a word. He just nodded a slow, respectful nod that acknowledged the difficulty of what I was doing. He knew the code. He knew that duty often demanded sacrifices that would break a lesser man. "Take him," I said. My voice was a dry leaf scraping across concrete. Damon's head snapped up. The reality of the situation was finally penetrating the fog of his shock. He wasn't just losing an argument. He wasn't just getting kicked out of the house. He was being processed. He was becoming a number. "Dad," he croaked. His voice was raw. "Dad, you can't let them do this. It is the FBI, Dad. They are going to put me in federal prison. Do you know what happens to people like me in federal prison?" I looked at him. I looked at the soft hands that had never known a callus. I looked at the manicured fingernails. "You should have thought about that before you picked up the phone, Damon," I said. He tried to lunge toward me, but Harris held him back with ease. "It was just a phone call," Damon screamed. "It was a prank, Dad. A strategy. I didn't hurt anyone. I just wanted to delay you. I didn't plant a bomb. I didn't hurt a fly. Why are you doing this to me?" I gripped the armrests of my wheelchair. The anger flared hot and bright in my chest. "Just a phone call," I repeated quietly. I stood up. I walked over to him until I was inches from his face. I could smell the terror on him. It smelled like copper and sour wine. "You called in a code red at Hartsfield-Jackson," I said. My voice was low, trembling with suppressed rage. "Do you know what happens when a code red is called Damon?" He shook his head, tears flying from his eyes. "I will tell you what happens," I said. "The entire terminal locks down. 400 flights are grounded. Thousands of passengers are stranded. Mothers can't get home to their children. Organs meant for transplant surgeries get stuck on the tarmac and spoil. The National Guard is mobilized. Snipers take positions on the roof." I poked him in the chest with a finger that felt like iron. "You didn't just pull a prank, Damon. You turned a city upside down. You put thousands of lives at risk. And you did it using the protocols that I wrote. You used my life's work as a weapon against me." Damon sobbed, his shoulders shaking. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't think about that. I just needed the money." "That is the problem," I said, stepping back. "You never think about anything but yourself. You didn't think about your mother when she was dying. You didn't think about the passengers on those planes. And you certainly didn't think about the man whose name you carry." Harris tightened his grip on Damon's arm. "Let's go," he said. They began to march him toward the front door. Damon fought then. He dug his heels into the hardwood floor. He twisted and turned, trying to break free. "No, no, no," he screamed. "I am not going. I am not going out there." He knew what was waiting outside. The front door opened. The bright morning sunlight flooded into the hallway, blindingly white. It was a beautiful Georgia morning. The birds were singing, the magnolias were blooming, and the entire neighborhood was watching. I walked out onto the porch. I stood on the top step, leaning on the railing, looking down at the spectacle. The driveway was filled with black SUVs. Blue lights were flashing silently, reflecting off the windows of the houses across the street. And on every porch, on every lawn, my neighbors were standing. There was Mrs. Higgins from next door holding her watering can, her mouth open in shock. There was Mr. Henderson, the retired postal worker, shaking his head. There were the kids who usually rode their bikes on the street, now standing still watching the drama unfold. These were the people Damon had mocked the night before. These were the people he had called noise and trash. He had wanted to move to Buckhead to get away from them. He had wanted to live among the elite. Well, he was the center of attention now. The agents dragged Damon down the steps. He was wailing now, a high-pitched sound that echoed through the quiet cul-de-sac. "Dad, please," he screamed, looking back at me over his shoulder. "Dad, tell them to stop. Everyone is looking. It is humiliating. Please, Dad, have some mercy." I looked down at him. I looked at the neighbors. I saw the shame on their faces, not for me, but for him. They knew me. They knew Augustus King. They knew I raised my flag every morning and took it down every night. They knew I shoveled their driveways when it snowed. They knew who I was, and now they knew who my son was. I didn't look away. I didn't hide inside the house. I stood tall, my spine straight, my chin up. I owned this moment. I owned the tragedy of it. Damon fell to his knees on the pavement. The agents tried to lift him, but he went dead weight, sobbing into the asphalt. "Dad," he cried, his voice breaking, "I can fix this. I can pay it back. I will work. I will do anything. Just don't let them take me. I am sorry about the money. I am sorry about the trust fund. I swear I didn't mean to steal it." I walked down one step. Just one. The agents paused. They looked at me, waiting to see if I would intervene, waiting to see if the father would override the lawman. Damon looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "Dad," he whispered. I looked him dead in the eye. The air between us crackled with the finality of the moment. "I can forgive you for the money, Damon," I said. My voice carried across the lawn, clear and steady. "Money is just paper. It can be earned. It can be replaced. I could have forgiven you for trying to sell the house. I could have even forgiven you for the insults." I paused, letting the words sink in. "But I will never forgive you for what you did at the airport." Damon flinched as if I had hit him. "You slandered my name in the one place where it meant everything I said. You took 30 years of honor, 30 years of service, and you dragged it through the mud to make a quick buck. You told the world I was a terrorist. You told the world I was mad." I pointed a finger at him. "You didn't just try to steal my fortune, son. You tried to steal my dignity. You tried to steal my history, and that is something I cannot forgive. Not in this life, and not in the next." Damon collapsed. The hope vanished from his eyes, leaving only a vast empty darkness. He realized then that there was no negotiation. There was no deal to be made. He had committed the one sin that Augustus King could not absolve. He had betrayed the code. "Get him out of here," I said to Harris. Harris nodded. He signaled his men. They lifted Damon up by his armpits. They didn't drag him this time. They carried him. He was limp broken. They walked him to the back of the SUV. I watched as they pushed his head down to clear the doorframe. I watched the heavy door slam shut. I saw his face pressed against the tinted glass, a distorted mask of grief and regret. The engine roared to life. The convoy began to move. I stood there on the steps as the cars rolled down the driveway. I watched them turn the corner past the dumpster that still held my books and my memories. Mrs. Higgins called out from her yard, "Mr. King, are you all right?" I looked at her. I saw the concern in her eyes. I managed a small, tight nod. "I am fine, Martha," I said. "Just doing a little spring cleaning." She nodded, understanding. She went back to watering her flowers. I turned back to the house. The front door was wide open. The hallway was empty. The silence was rushing back in, filling the void where my family used to be. I walked inside. I closed the door. I locked it. I leaned my back against the wood and closed my eyes. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind a deep bone-crushing fatigue. My hands started to shake. A single tear, the only one I would allow myself, escaped from the corner of my eye and ran down my cheek. It wasn't a tear for Damon. It was a tear for the little boy I used to carry on my shoulders. The boy who used to want to be a pilot. The boy who got lost somewhere along the way and became a stranger. I wiped the tear away with the back of my hand. "Goodbye, Damon," I whispered to the empty hall. I pushed off the door and walked toward the living room. I had a lot to do. I had to call the bank. I had to call the lawyers. I had to figure out how to live the rest of my life in a house that suddenly felt very, very big. But first I was going to find that record, Kind of Blue. I was going to play it again. And I was going to sit in my chair, and I was going to drink a glass of water in peace. The King dynasty was dead. Long live the king. The last black SUV disappeared around the corner, taking my son to a place where his Italian suits and charm would be worth absolutely nothing. The neighborhood was quiet again. The neighbors had retreated into their homes, probably to text each other about the downfall of the King family. I stood on the porch for a moment, breathing in the air. It smelled of exhaust fumes and honeysuckle, a strange mix of the mechanical and the natural. My heart was beating slow and steady. The war was over, but there was still one enemy combatant left on the field. I turned around and walked back into the house. The front door was wide open. In the foyer, standing amidst the wreckage of her ambitions, was Tiffany. The FBI had taken Damon because he was the one who made the call. He was the priority target. They had left Tiffany behind for the moment, perhaps to be picked up later, or perhaps because they knew she had nowhere to go. She was frantic. She was stuffing things into a Louis Vuitton duffel bag, not clothes. She was grabbing the silver candlesticks from the hallway table. She was grabbing a small bronze statue I had bought in Paris. She was looting the ship before it finally went under. I watched her for a moment. She looked like a desperate animal scrounging for scraps. She didn't see me standing there. She was muttering to herself, cursing Damon, cursing me, cursing the unfairness of the universe. "Put it down, Tiffany," I said. She jumped, dropping the statue. It hit the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. She spun around. Her face was a mess of smeared makeup and sweat. Her eyes were wild. "I am leaving," she snapped, trying to regain some shred of her former arrogance. "I am taking what is mine. I need money, Augustus. Your son ruined me. He left me with nothing. I deserve compensation for the years I wasted in this family." I walked toward her. The sound of my shoes on the floor was the only rhythm in the room. "You deserve a cell next to his," I said calmly. "But I am a tired man, Tiffany. And frankly, I don't want to spend the next 6 months testifying at your trial. I just want you gone." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I pulled out a single folded piece of paper. It wasn't a court order. It wasn't a warrant. It was a printout of an internal audit log from First National Bank. Tiffany froze. She recognized the logo at the top of the page. "You thought I only looked at Damon's accounts," I said. "But when I hired the forensic accountant, I told him to look at everything, including the internal suspense accounts at your branch." I held the paper up. "You have been creative, Tiffany. Skimming fractions of pennies from inactive accounts, moving them into a holding fund, then wiring them to a shell company in the Caymans. It is an old scheme. They call it salami slicing. You take thin slices, hoping nobody notices the whole sausage is getting smaller." Tiffany's face went white, whiter than the walls she wanted to paint. That is not true," she stammered. "It is true," I said. "And it is right here. $200,000 over 4 years. That is federal bank fraud, Tiffany. That is 20 years minimum. And unlike Damon's sloppy phone call, this leaves a paper trail that never disappears." I took a step closer. "I haven't given this to the FBI yet," I said. "I haven't given it to your boss, Mr. Henderson. Right now it is just a piece of paper in my hand." Tiffany looked at the paper, then at me. Her hands were shaking so hard she had to grip the strap of her bag to steady them. "What do you want?" she whispered. "I want my house back," I said. "I want the smell of your perfume out of my air. I want the sound of your voice out of my head." I looked at my watch. "It is 10:15, I said. "You have exactly 5 minutes. 5 minutes, she gasped. "To do what?" "To leave," I said. "To walk out that door and never come back. If you are still on my property at 10:20, I will fax this document to the bank's fraud department. And by noon, you will be wearing handcuffs just like Damon." "But my clothes," she cried, looking toward the stairs. "My jewelry, my shoes. I can't leave everything. I have a wardrobe worth $50,000 upstairs. You have 4 minutes, I said, checking my watch again. I walked past her into the living room. I didn't look back. I sat down in my armchair, the one she wanted to throw away. I crossed my legs. You can take the bag you are holding, I called out, but put the silver back. That belonged to my grandmother. I heard a clatter as she dumped the bag onto the floor. I heard the sound of silver hitting wood. I heard the zipper of the bag being pulled shut. 3 minutes. Tiffany. I heard her running. She didn't run upstairs. She realized she didn't have time. She ran toward the door. She stopped for a second. I hate you, she screamed. Her voice was raw, primal. I hate you and I hate this house. The feeling is mutual, I said quietly to the empty room. I heard the front door slam. It was a solid final sound. I heard the click of heels running down the driveway. I heard a car engine start, probably her own car, which she had parked on the street. Tires screeched, and then silence. I waited. I watched the second hand on my watch sweep past the 12, 10:20. She was gone. I stood up. I walked to the front door. I locked it. I threw the deadbolt. Then I engaged the security chain. I turned around and looked at my house. It was a mess. There were boxes everywhere. There was mud on the carpet. There was shattered glass near the fireplace. The air still held the faint, lingering scent of her expensive floral perfume. I walked to the closet. I pulled out a heavy-duty trash bag. I walked through the house methodically. I picked up the throw pillows she had bought, into the bag. I picked up the modern art vase she had put on the mantel, into the bag. I went into the bathroom, her shampoos, her lotions, her soaps, into the bag. I walked out to the garage. I opened the dumpster that was sitting in the driveway. The dumpster they had rented to throw away my life. I threw the bag in. It felt good. It felt like exorcism. I went back inside. I went to the kitchen. I found the bucket and the mop. I filled the bucket with hot water and pine cleaner. The smell of pine rose up sharp and clean, masking the floral scent. I got down on my knees. My joints popped. My back ached, but I scrubbed. I scrubbed the floor where Damon had stood. I scrubbed the spot where Tiffany had stood. I scrubbed away the scuff marks from their shoes. I scrubbed away the invisible stains of their greed. I worked for 2 hours. I sweated through my shirt. My arms burned. But with every stroke of the mop, the house started to feel like mine again. The oppressive weight that had hung over the rooms for years began to lift. When the floors were shining, I went to the garage. I found the box labeled trash. I dug through it until I found the silver frame, the photo of Clara. I wiped it off with my sleeve. I carried it into the living room. I placed it back on the mantel, right in the center where it had always been. I looked at her face. She was smiling. "I'm sorry it took so long, Clara," I whispered. "The house was dirty, but it is clean now." I went to the bookshelf. I ran my fingers over the spines of the records. They were safe. I pulled out a specific album, John Coltrane, A Love Supreme. I took the vinyl out of the sleeve. I placed it on the turntable. I cleaned the needle. I lowered the arm. The first notes of the saxophone floated into the air, warm, melancholy, spiritual. It filled the corners of the room, pushing out the last of the silence. I walked to the liquor cabinet. I found the bottle of whiskey, a 20-year-old single malt. I took a crystal glass, not the ones they had used, a heavy tumbler that felt solid in my hand. I poured 2 fingers of amber liquid. I didn't add ice. I wanted to taste the burn. I walked over to my armchair. I sat down. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes, letting the music wash over me. I took a sip. The whiskey was smooth, smoky, with a hint of peat and oak. It tasted like survival. I was alone. There would be no more Sunday dinners with Damon. There would be no grandchildren running through the halls. The line of Augustus King ended here in this room. But as I sat there listening to Coltrane with the sun setting through the window, I realized something. I wasn't lonely. I was free. I had cut out the rot. I had saved the legacy. I had kept my promise to Otis and to Clara. The phone on the table buzzed. It was probably the lawyer, or the bank, or the press. I didn't reach for it. I let it buzz until it stopped. I took another sip of whiskey. "Let them wait," I said to the empty room. "The king is resting." 6 months is a long time in the life of a man. In 6 months, seasons change, governments fall, and if you are lucky, wounds begin to heal into scars that you can look at without flinching. I was standing in the terminal of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport again. The last time I stood here, I was a suspect. I was a confused old man being boxed in by agents who thought I was a threat. I was carrying the weight of betrayal in a briefcase and the fear of losing my legacy in my heart. But today the air smelled different. It smelled like opportunity. It smelled like jet fuel and expensive coffee and freedom. I was wearing a new suit, not the navy blue one I had worn during the worst week of my life. That suit was gone, donated to a shelter along with the rest of the ghosts from my closet. Today I was wearing a light gray linen suit tailored to perfection. I walked with my cane not because I needed it, but because it was made of ebony and silver and it felt good in my hand. It was a symbol of authority, not infirmity. I approached the security checkpoint. The lines were long, winding snakes of stressed travelers checking their watches and juggling luggage. I didn't join them. I walked to the far left to the lane marked Priority Access. A TSA agent stepped forward to check my boarding pass. He was young, sharp-eyed. He looked at the name on the ticket, then he looked up at me. His eyes widened slightly. He straightened his posture, snapping his heels together instinctively. "Director King," he said. "It is an honor, sir. We haven't seen you in a while." I smiled. It was a genuine smile, the kind that reaches the eyes. "I have been busy, son," I said, "taking care of some house cleaning." He unclipped the velvet rope. "Right this way, sir. No need to take off your shoes. We know who you are. We know who you are." Those words echoed in my mind. 6 months ago, they thought they knew who I was. They thought I was a terrorist. They thought I was a victim. Now they knew the truth. They saw the man who had cleaned up his own mess. They saw the man who had taken down a corruption ring from his living room. I walked through the metal detector. It didn't beep. I picked up my bag. It was a new leather carry-on. Inside there were no legal documents. There were no affidavits. There was just a change of clothes, a good book, and a folder containing the details of the Clara King Memorial Scholarship. I wasn't going to Chicago to fight. I was going to Chicago to give. I walked to the Delta Sky Club. The receptionist greeted me by name. I ordered a glass of sparkling water and sat by the window watching the planes take off. They looked like silver birds climbing into the clouds, leaving the gravity of Earth behind. That was how I felt. Weightless. I thought about the house. The big colonial house with the manicured lawn and the empty bedrooms. I had sold it 3 months ago. A young couple bought it. They had 2 small children and a golden retriever. When I handed them the keys, the wife hugged me. She said she could feel the love in the walls. She didn't know about the war that had been fought in the living room. She didn't know about the FBI raid or the betrayal. She just felt the 30 years of happiness I had shared with Clara, and that was enough. And that was, the house deserved to be happy again. I had moved into a condo downtown. It was a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It was modern, clean, and efficient. I had my jazz records. I had my books. And I had silence. But it wasn't the lonely silence of the abandoned. It was the peaceful silence of the monk. It was a sanctuary. I took a sip of water and looked at the empty seat across from me. For a fleeting second, I thought of Damon. He was in a federal facility in Kentucky now. He had pleaded guilty. His lawyer told him it was the only way to avoid a 20-year sentence. He got 8 years. 8 years to think about the phone call. 8 years to think about the money. I had received a letter from him last week. It was written on prison stationery. I recognized the handwriting, the loops of the Y and the G that I had taught him when he was in kindergarten. I had held the envelope in my hand for a long time. I traced the postmark with my thumb. I didn't open it. I didn't burn it. I didn't throw it in the trash in a fit of rage. I simply wrote, "Return to sender" on the front, and dropped it back in the mailbox. It wasn't cruelty. It was boundaries. I realized sitting there watching a 747 lift off the runway that I hadn't lost a son. You can only lose something that you actually have. I never had the son I thought I had. I had an image, a hope, a projection of my own ego. I wanted him to be honorable, so I pretended he was. I wanted him to be strong, so I ignored his weakness. I had loved a ghost for 30 years. The real Damon, the man who could leave his mother to die and his father to rot, that man was a stranger. And you don't mourn strangers who try to kill you. You just survive them. Mr. King. I looked up. It was David Patterson, the current security director. He was holding a cup of coffee, looking a little grayer than the last time I saw him. "David," I said, nodding. He sat down next to me. "I heard you were passing through," he said. I just wanted to say, good job, Gus, with everything. The investigation is officially closed. Tiffany took a plea deal yesterday. She gave up the whole network at the bank. I nodded. I figured she would. Tiffany was never loyal to anything but her own skin. David hesitated, then looked at me with a serious expression. Are you okay, Gus? Really? I mean, it is a lot for a man to go through alone. I looked out the window. The sun was breaking through the clouds, illuminating the Atlanta skyline. I am not alone, David, I said. I have myself, and I meant it. For the first time in decades, I wasn't Augustus the provider. I wasn't Augustus the husband. I wasn't Augustus the father. I was just me. I was the man who loved jazz, the man who loved history, the man who believed in integrity. I had found myself in the wreckage of my family, and I liked the man I found. They called my flight, first-class boarding. I stood up. I shook David's hand. Take care of my airport, David, I said. Always, Chief, he replied. I walked to the gate. I handed my ticket to the agent. She scanned it. It beeped a happy green sound. Enjoy your flight, Mr. King, she said, smiling. I walked down the jet bridge. The tunnel was cool and quiet. I stepped onto the plane. The flight attendant took my jacket. I sat in seat 1A, wide leather seat, legroom, a glass of champagne waiting on the console. I picked up the glass. The bubbles rose to the surface, tiny golden spheres of air fighting to be free. I raised the glass to the empty seat beside me. To Clara. I was going to Chicago to sign the papers for the scholarship. $5 million. It would send 50 kids to college. 50 kids from neighborhoods like the one I grew up in. 50 kids who would learn that character matters more than currency. That was the legacy. Not the bloodline, not the name, but the impact. Damon had tried to steal the money to buy a nose job and a condo. I was using it to build a future for 50 strangers. I closed my eyes as the engines roared to life. The plane began to move. I felt the thrust pushing me back into the seat, the power, the momentum. I wasn't an old man at the end of his life. I was a traveler at the beginning of a new journey. The wheels left the ground. We were airborne. I looked down at the earth falling away. The cars looked like toys. The houses looked like boxes. The prison where my son slept was just a speck in the distance, invisible and irrelevant. I turned my head away from the window. I opened my book. I took a sip of champagne. I was flying. And this time there was no one to ground me. Many parents believe that their legacy is what they leave to their children. But sometimes, the most important legacy is the integrity you keep from them when they prove unworthy. I learned that blood connects us biologically, but loyalty connects us spiritually. You cannot save someone who is determined to drown you to stay afloat. Walking away from your own toxic child isn't cruelty. It is the highest form of self-preservation. Dignity has no price tag, and respect is not an inheritance. It must be earned, every single day, even by your own flesh and blood. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us share these important lessons with more people. I would love to know where you are listening from today, and if you have ever had to make a tough choice to protect your own peace. Let me know in the comments below. Stay strong, stay dignified, and I will see you in the next story.